Chapter 2065. She shrunk back and forth in Shenluo Anne's arms. Shenluo and couldn't help laughing when he saw her cute and scared look. "What if I have to eat you?" Shenluo and looked at her, pressed her against the door, and rubbed her gently. "I won't feel uncomfortable after eating you." Shenmanting was slightly stunned, and her whole body was hot. She blushed even more, looked away, and said nervously and fearfully, "Then, if you will feel better after eating me, then you eat me." As she said that, she rolled up her sleeves with trembling hands and stretched out her white and tender hands in front of Shenluo and, "Bite me. If I'm still alive, remember to send me to the hospital." Although she said that, Shenmanting's eyes were already red. She looked at him with a pleading look. Obviously, she was very scared. Shenluo and laughed even louder, lifted her up, and lifted her clothes with his palm. "Hubby!" Shenmanting was a little scared and wanted to hold him down, but she couldn't stop him at all. Shenluo Anne's hand had already reached into her clothes and pinched her lovely white and tender hands. A strange feeling arose from that place. Shenmanting couldn't help but scream, "Hubby!" Shenluo didn't make a sound, and he lowered his head to take all her words into his mouth. He gently licked and kissed her and heavily teased her. "Oh, Shenmanting couldn't help but breathe heavily because of his familiar movements. Hearing her voice, Shenluo couldn't help but lower his head and bite her white and erect breasts. He ravaged and sucked, and Shenmanting felt like she was bitten by ants all over, and it was extremely uncomfortable. She couldn't help but make a strange sound, but it was just a sound, and Shenmanting quickly covered her mouth. But her body was still being teased, and a strange and turbulent feeling crushed what little was left of her rationality. She couldn't help but squint her eyes and hold his head with both hands. She clasped her legs around his, and even her toes curled up. She felt uncomfortable all over, but it seemed quite comfortable. "Daddy!" A childish voice suddenly broke in. The world that had been surging with dark waves was like a mirror that had been shattered by a single punch. Shenluo Anne's movements immediately froze, and Shenmanting breathed a sigh of relief. When Shenmanting realized that she had been put down, she hurriedly tugged at her clothes. His face had already turned red, and his body was burning hot. Shenmanting stumbled out of the room in a hurry. When she saw her son enter the room, she picked up the infant and sat on the bed. His heart was still beating fast, and he could not help but look at the cloakroom. Shenluo walked out from inside. His clothes were disheveled, and the tie around his neck was crooked. Shenmanting couldn't help but take a second look at his tall figure. Shenluo didn't linger and quickly entered the bathroom. She heard the sound of water splashing, and she found it a little strange. "Bathing at this time? Aren't you going to work?" Just as he was feeling puzzled, Nanny he entered the room. The moment Nanny he saw Shenmanting's swollen lips and messy clothes, as well as the sound of running water in the bathroom, she knew what had happened. She hurried forward and held the little boy's hand. "Let's go. Grandma made you something to eat. I'll feed you," Nanny he said. "Shall you?" Pouted unhappily and turned around to hug Shenmanting. "I don't want to eat, Mom." Chapter 2066. She stood up with the baby in her arms and said, "I'll go feed him. What'd you make?" Her cheeks were a little red, and she looked very shy. Nanny looked at her with an ambiguous expression and said, "I made some colorful noodles with vegetable powder. It's very nutritious." "Okay." Shenmanting walked out, and Yi Qianqian walked out at the same time. "Qianqian." Shenmanting looked at Yi Qianqian and said, "You're out." Yi Qianqian blinked. She felt a little uncomfortable being called that, especially when she thought of what had happened just now. She felt even more embarrassed. Yi Qianqian nodded and forced herself to calm down. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Shenmanting was a little hesitant, but she quickly said, "Are you going out later?" No." Yi Qianqian felt that she wanted to say something, but stopped. "Do you have something to say?" "Well, I have something to ask you. Let's go out for a walk later." Shenmanting smiled. "I have a lot to ask you." "Okay." Yi Qianqian agreed. Looking at her expectant look, she felt a little strange. "Call me later." "Okay." Shenmanting sat on the sofa and fed the baby. Little Moon ate happily while twisting the little toy in his hand. He suddenly looked up and mumbled with his mouth full, "Daddy." Shenluo and was still in the same outfit, but he didn't wear his tie. When he heard the little boy shout, he went forward and rubbed his head. He said to someone, "I'm going to work. Wait for me to come back." He was looking at the little boy, but Shin Manting knew that he was talking to her. She nodded and replied softly, "Okay." Shenluo and left quickly. Shin Manting stared at his back, her heart filled with satisfaction. She felt even more embarrassed when she thought of Shenluo and's intimate actions just now. She also felt strange in her body. It was very strange. Shin Manting didn't know what this feeling was, but it seemed that she liked it. Shenluo and left quickly. Shin Manting was a little absent-minded as she fed the baby. Nanny he noticed and said, "If you have something to do, go ahead. I'll feed the baby." "There's no need for that. Nanny you could go about your business." "I'll do it," Shin Manting insisted. After feeding the baby, she took him to play in the garden. Looking at Little Moon bouncing up and down, Shin Manting felt the happiness of a mother. "That's great." Yi Qianqian's voice came from behind. In the blink of an eye, the child has grown up so much. Yi Qianqian looked at the little boy and turned to look at Shin Manting. "I really envy you. Why are you envious of me?" Shin Manting looked at her in confusion. "I'm envious of you. I think you're pretty and sensible. Julia seems to like you very much." Yi Qianqian couldn't help but take another look at her and said, "You've indeed changed. Manting, it's better for you to stay like this." "Is that so?" Shin Manting was a little embarrassed. "My husband seems to think so too." "Did he say anything to you?" Shin Manting shook her head. "He didn't say anything, but I could feel that he was thinking the same thing." Chapter 2067. Yi Qianqian thought about it and explained, "Actually, it's not that I don't like you. I just like the way you are right now. You look happy every day. You don't remember anything, so you don't feel any pain. It's pretty good." "Was it painful for me before?" Shin Manting was a little puzzled. "I feel like I'm the one who's in pain now that I don't know anything. Hubby always calls me Manting, 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 but I don't feel happy at all. I feel so sad." After all, she was a 12-year-old girl and didn't know how to hide her emotions at all. Yi Qianqian looked at her pouting face and turned her head away. She seemed to be sighing with emotion as she said meaningfully, "He loves you." "I know," Shin Manting replied with a smile on her face. However, within a few seconds, her smile disappeared and she said, "But he won't play with me." Yi Qianqian was speechless. Looking at Shin Manting's angry face, she didn't seem to be joking. It was at that moment that Yi Qianqian once again realized that this was a 12-year-old girl. Yi Qianqian thought for a moment and explained, "Perhaps Big Brother is busy." She glanced at Shin Manting's expression and deliberated over her choice of words before saying, "Moreover, he's more mature and steady. Normally, I don't think he'll play much." The more Yi Qianqian thought about it, the more convinced she became. She finally made up her mind and nodded her head. "He's always been so serious. Don't mind him too much." "But why can Julia play with you?" Shin Manting was puzzled. Yi Qianqian was surprised. "Huh, you had so much fun this morning." Shin Manting looked at him enviously and said, "My husband never plays with me. I want to play too." Yi Qianqian was speechless. She thought Shin Manting was talking about the game of eagle catches chicks or hide and seek. Hearing this, he coughed lightly and said, "Well, what we did this morning can't be considered as playing." "Huh?" Shin Manting was a little confused. "But you're smiling so happily. Aren't you playing?" Yi Qianqian felt a little embarrassed and replied, "Well, not really. Besides, I'm not that happy either." "Yes." Shin Manting was very certain. "You're so happy." Yi Qianqian replied, "Well, be happy then." "Humph. You're still trying to deceive me." Shin Manting looked as if she had already seen through him. Yi Qianqian felt even more embarrassed. When she saw Yi Qianqian's expression, she explained in all seriousness, "I didn't. We weren't actually playing. To be exact, we were flirting." Shin Manting's eyes widened when she heard that word. Flirt? She looked as if Yi Qianqian had said something unbelievable. Yi Qianqian suddenly felt guilty for lying to a little girl. When she saw the expression on Yi Qianqian's face, she turned her head away and said, "Yeah, we're husband and wife. It's normal for us to flirt and play around. Then why doesn't my husband flirt with me?" Yi Qianqian replied, "I can't answer your question." "Why?" Shen Manting was puzzled. Yi Qianqian was silent for a moment before she said, "How about this? When Big Brother comes home at night, you can ask him. You can say, 'Honey, why aren't you flirting with me? Look at the people next door. They're all flirting.'" Chapter 2068. Yi Qianqian said, "That's not the point. The point is that you have to ask him. You shouldn't be asking me this kind of question." "Oh, okay." Shen Manting nodded quickly. "I understand. I'll ask him tonight why he didn't flirt with me." Yi Qianqian finally raised her head in relief and said, "Very good, but don't tell him that I taught you. It'll be troublesome if you say that I'm a bad influence on a child." Shen Manting looked at her with a smile and said, "You're the child. I'm taller than you. You're more like a child than me." Yi Qianqian was a little confused. She sighed softly and said, "I shouldn't have told you so much." She seemed to have been a bad influence on her. Shen Manting's temperament, the way she spoke, and the expression in her eyes didn't seem like that of a normal adult. Although she was not mentally retarded, Yi Qianqian could no longer treat her as a peer. Shen Manting looked at her and asked, "How long have you been married to Julia?" 2 years. Yi Qianqian glanced at Little Moon, who was playing with the grass on the ground. "I got married to Old Shun the year Big Brother brought him back." "Then, when did my husband and I get married?" Shen Manting looked at her and said, "I think it's been a long time, but it doesn't seem that long." Shen Manting suddenly felt a little childish when she said that. She coughed and said with a straight face, "That's right. I'm just curious. You're married and you have a ring on your finger." Shen Manting glanced at Yi Qianqian's hand. On the ring finger of her left hand, there was a very shiny and beautiful diamond ring. After a moment, she looked at her somewhat thin hand. Her skin was a little yellow, and it didn't look as good as Yi Qianqian's hand at all. "And I don't have a ring on my finger." Yi Qianqian subconsciously hid her hand when she heard that. Her eyes were a little evasive. She looked into the distance and suddenly felt a little guilty. Why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I have a ring? Because Shen Manting and Shen Luo, and we're not married at all. Shen Manting was not willing to wear Shen Luo Anne's ring at all. However, even though she knew that, how could she bring it up to Shen Manting? It was difficult to speak at all. He glanced at Shen Manting, coughed softly, and said, "Maybe it's because you've slept for too long. Look at your hand. It's so skinny. How can you wear a ring?" "Yes, yes." Shen Manting felt inexplicably happy when she heard his answer. "That's what I thought too. Actually, I saw a ring in the shape of a heart with many diamonds. It was placed under the blanket, but it was too big for me, so I put it back." Shen Manting spoke with a hint of boastfulness in her voice. "It's very beautiful." As Yi Qianqian watched, she found it amusing and sad at the same time. She nodded her head and reached out to hold Yi Qianqian's hand. In a soft voice, she said, "It's good that you like him. Big Brother actually likes you very much. He loves you very much. As long as you believe in him with all your heart, he won't let you down." Shen Manting felt a little puzzled and didn't quite understand what she meant. She nodded and said, "Yes, I know he loves me very much. I can feel it. No one has ever treated me like this before. I love him very much, too. Yes, I know he loves me very much. I can feel it. No one has ever treated me like this before." Chapter 2069. Yi Qianqian's eyes widened, and she was a little confused. "What did you just say?" Shen Manting thought that she hadn't made herself clear, so she repeated, "Can you teach me how to seduce men?" Yi Qianqian wanted to laugh, but when she saw Shen Manting's serious expression, she couldn't laugh. She coughed lightly. "Actually, I don't know how to do that. As long as a man likes you, you don't have to seduce him. He will come over himself. If he doesn't like you, no matter how you seduce him, it's useless." These words were the truth of the world. When Yi Qianqian said this, she saw that Shen Manting had a look of understanding on her face. "Then, do I still have to seduce my husband?" Shen Manting looked a little defeated. "I think my husband likes me, but sometimes I feel that he doesn't like me that much." Yesterday, I used my phone to check it out and tried to imitate what's written on it, but I realized that it didn't work. What things? Prepare the bathwater for my husband, shave, tie his tie, and give him a good morning kiss. Wow. Yi Qianqian was a little surprised. You did all that? A little tis-tis. Yi Qianqian laughed even more. She didn't know how she felt, but she said, I've never done those things that you mentioned. Moreover, Shunjulia had always been the one who prepared the bathwater for her. Well, in all fairness, Shunjulia was really good to her. Although he had been a little demanding in some aspects recently, at least he was wholeheartedly devoted to her. Shen Manting felt a little embarrassed, and her cheeks turned slightly red. She said, Oh, it's my first time being someone else's wife. I don't know what to do. As she said this, she pouted and said, Qianqian, teach me what I should do. Otherwise, I don't know what to do to be a wife. It's very simple. You just have to take care of the child. Yi Qianqian shrugged. The child is still young. You have to take care of the child and let him worry less. That's a good wife. Oh. Shen Manting nodded and couldn't help but ask curiously, Since you don't have children, what do you usually do when you have nothing to do? Yi Qianqian replied, Give birth. Oh. Shen Manting looked at her belly and asked, Are you going to have a baby? Yi Qianqian rubbed her belly and smiled bitterly. I'll give birth once I'm pregnant. The key was that she couldn't get pregnant. In the past 2 years, they had not taken any safety measures. She just couldn't get pregnant. This year, she was already 28 years old. If she delayed any longer, she might become an elderly pregnant woman. Moreover, if Grandma and Uncle Blind were right, this year, it was very likely that she could get pregnant. She looked at Little Moon, who was having a great time playing by himself. She felt a twinge of jealousy in her heart and said longingly, That's why I'm so envious of you. You don't know anything when you wake up. You've forgotten all the unhappy things. You even have a cute baby and a man who loves you. Shen Manting sensed that she seemed to be a little sad, so she cautiously said, You have it too. You have to continue living happily. When Yi Qianqian saw the look on her face, a bright smile appeared on her face, and she nodded her head. Yeah. Shen Juliet came home very early that day, and he seemed to be in a good mood. Chapter 2070. Little Moon looked at him and gave him a peck on the cheek. Shen Julia smiled and asked, Where's your aunt? The little guy's eyes were big, black, and bright. He pointed to the room and said, Son Senior, Auntie, lift your tongue. Shen Julia pinched his cheek. Tell me, Auntie. Son. Little Moon grinned and wiggled his little body excitedly. Uncle. Little rascal, Shun Julia said as he placed him on the sofa. He looked up and saw Shun Manting walking out of the kitchen with a plate of fruit in her hand. Sister-in-law, Qianqian and I are going back to Yintown for a while. Well, Yintown is Qianqian's hometown, right? She gave him a watermelon. Qianqian told me about it. Go ahead. I'll go in first then. Shun Julia took a bite of the watermelon, then stood up and pushed the door open. Honey, I'm back. Yi Qianqian was sleeping. When she heard Shun Julia's voice, she covered her head with the blanket and shouted, Don't be noisy. Shun Julia took off his shoes and leaned over. He pulled down the blanket and teased. You're sleeping so early? Were you tired last night? You still have a nerve to say that? Yi Qianqian lifted the blanket and said angrily, I haven't been feeling well for the past few days, and you deliberately messed with me. How did I do that? Shun Julia looked aggrieved. He leaned over and whispered, Aren't I working hard for our future happiness? Scram! Shun Julia laughed out loud and tugged at her. Let's go. If we rush back to Yintown now, we can still take Dad out for dinner. I've already told him. What time is it? It's 4 o'clock. The plane leaves at 5:30. Yi Qianqian immediately stood up and said, Wait for me. By the time Yi Qianqian finished washing up, more than 10 minutes had passed. Shun Julia had it simple. He pulled his suitcase up and went to the door to wait for her. On his way out, Shun Julia noticed that Shun Manting seemed to be glancing at him a few times. She couldn't help but ask, Sister-in-law, Do you need something from me? Shun Manting shook her head and said no. Oh. Shun Julia looked away, but after a while, he felt that she was looking at him again. Shun Manting looked up and immediately averted her eyes. Shenjulia found it a little strange, but soon Yi Qianqian came out. As the couple walked out of the house, Shenjulia whispered, "Why do I feel that Sister Manting is acting a little strange today?" Yi Qianqian was shocked, but she quickly pretended to be calm and asked, "How so?" "That's right. I think she's peeking at me." Shenjulia felt goosebumps all over his body. She's only 12 years old at the moment. Don't tell me she fell in love with me because I'm handsome. Go away. Yi Qianqian shot him a look of disdain. How can you be so shameless? I think she might want to ask you something. What is it? Ahem. She kept pestering me with questions for the whole day, so I just gave her a CD. Shenjulia had a bad feeling about this. What disc? It's the one you brought back last time. Yi Qianqian was a little embarrassed and ran forward. Shenjulia was dumbfounded. He quickly chased after her and shouted, "Are you crazy? Big Brother is going to kill me." Chapter 2071. Shenjulia was actually convinced by her fallacious reasoning, but he still felt strange in his heart, so he followed her and said, "Wait for me." Shenmanting took care of the child while he ate and bathed. She finally managed to coax him to sleep before she went to wash up. When she came out, it was already past 8 o'clock, but Shenluo still hadn't returned. Shenmanting was a little bored, so she took out the thing that Yi Qianqian had given her in the afternoon. It was a small, round box with a CD inside. The CD was two-sided and had no pictures. She followed the method that Yi Qianqian had taught her in the afternoon. She first locked the door, then turned on the computer in the room, and then inserted the CD into it. Her fingers touched the touch panel a few times, and after clicking the mouse, an image appeared. A drunken man, wearing a suit, stumbled back home. Soon, a woman who looked very conservatively opened the door and carried him in. She spoke in a strange language that Shenmanting couldn't understand at all. After watching for a while, Shenmanting finally understood. The husband was probably drunk. When he returned home, the wife brought a basin of water, wrung out a towel, and wiped the husband's face and hands. She also took off the husband's suit and then took off his shoes. Shenmanting secretly noted it down and thought to herself, "The next time my husband comes home drunk, I'll take care of him like this." But in the TV, the husband was sleeping on the sofa, so when the time came, she would directly carry her husband to the big bed. But as she continued to watch, something didn't seem right. The wife began to cry, and as she cried, the husband seemed to become impatient and kicked his wife. Shenmanting saw it and felt a little angry. That's so annoying. How dare he hit his wife? But then she saw the wife stand up and walk away. Well done. Shenmanting was angry, and then she applauded her wife. But then, the husband seemed to have a look of regret on his face. He stood up and staggered back to the room with his wife. Back in the room, the wife sat on the bed and cried bitterly. When she saw her husband come in, she stopped crying and didn't dare to move. The husband went forward, pinched his wife's chin, and kissed her. Shenmanting's eyes widened, and she couldn't believe what she saw. Weren't they just arguing? What was even more unbelievable was that the woman did not resist and hugged the man. After kissing for a few minutes, they began to undress. Shenmanting was actually a little excited. She hugged her legs and sat on the bed with great interest. Soon, the husband's shirt was taken off, and the wife was only left with a white bra. Her husband pushed the bra up and bit her. Shenmanting subconsciously covered her small chest. She was suddenly reminded of what Shenluo had done to her in the morning. Then, he heard an ambiguous voice coming from the woman's mouth. Shenmanting covered her mouth, and her cheeks turned red. It was the same feeling she had in the morning. She felt a little uncomfortable, and as she watched, she felt more and more uncomfortable. As the scene on the television became more and more intense, the wife placed her palm on the place where her husband peed. It was so big. It was completely different from Little Moon's. Shenmanting suddenly realized that the spot she had poked several times in the morning. Wasn't that the spot? Heavens! Chapter 2072. Then his wife ate the thing in one bite. Shenmanting was a little shocked and watched with her eyes wide open. However, she didn't expect that the man not only didn't seem to be in pain, but also enjoyed it. The man's voice was extremely embarrassing. Shenmanting couldn't help but rub her legs. When she was about to continue watching, she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. Perhaps the door couldn't be opened, so someone knocked on it from outside. Shenmanting quickly closed the computer, got out of bed, and opened the door. Shenluo and looked a little tired. When he saw her, he smiled slightly. He reached out to touch her head and said, "Why did you lock the door all of a sudden?" Shenmanting felt even more uncomfortable. She looked away guiltily and said, "Why did you come back so late? It's only 9 o'clock. It's not late." Shenluo and walked in and closed the door. "I'll come back early tomorrow." However, when the light in the room was turned on, he could clearly see her face. He reached out to touch it, and it was indeed a little hot. Shenluo frowned and had a bad feeling. "What's wrong with you? Why is your face so red?" Shenmanting lowered her head and quickly took his hand away. She mumbled, "Well, I'll go run the bathwater for you." After that, she quickly turned around and went to the bathroom. Shenmanting turned on the faucet and heard the sound of running water. She finally breathed a sigh of relief. When she thought of the image on the computer, she felt even more ashamed. It was too perverted. How could Yi Qianqian show her such a thing? "Qianqian, I don't think the 10 little things on the internet are very useful. Do you have any way to make my husband like me more?" "Well, there is, but it's not very suitable for you." "What way?" "I can do it. It's not convenient for me to say, but if you are interested, I can give you a CD. You can watch it whenever you want, but you must watch it at night. Don't watch it during the day. When you watch it, lock the door and wait for your husband to come back. He will like you." "Really? Really, you could try it." "Well, thank you so much, Qianqian." She thought it would be similar to the 10 little things, but she didn't expect it to be. Shenmanting's mind was buzzing, but suddenly she remembered. It seems the computer is still on the bed. She immediately stood up and jogged out of the room. The sound of water was getting softer and softer, but at the same time, another sound was getting louder and louder. Shenmanting's body tensed up, and she immediately heard the man's panting. "Don't look." Shenmanting hurried forward, covered the laptop, and hid it behind her. His face was already as red as an apple. I didn't know it was such a thing." Shenmanting stammered. "Someone gave it to me." "Who gave it to you?" Shenluo and walked over and stood in front of her. He looked at her with a burning gaze. Shenmanting felt an itch in her heart. She looked at him and said, "Qianqian gave it to me." "Why did she give you this?" She said. Shenmanting was extremely embarrassed. "I asked her how I could make you like me more. She told me to lock the door and watch this so that you would like me more, so I watched it," Shenmanting said. Chapter 2073. Shenluo, Anne's eyes darkened. He took the computer from her hand and said, "She didn't mean to let you watch it secretly." "What?" Shenmanting couldn't react for a moment. "Go inside and turn off the water." Shenluo and turned on the computer again. Shenmanting seemed to know what he meant. She was a little embarrassed and lowered her head, saying, "This is not good." "Go ahead." Shenluo and rubbed her head and said, "Come back after you're done." "Okay." Shenmanting was very obedient. She obediently went to the bathroom and turned off the water. "Turn off the lights, too." When she walked out, she heard Shenluo and say this. At that moment, Shenluo and was sitting in bed with the computer on the quilt. A pair of amber eyes were staring at her. It was very deep, very thick, and very dangerous. Shenmanting was a little scared. She shrank and said, "Honey, come here." Shenluo and waved at her and said, "Come here." Shenmanting bit the bullet and turned off the lights. She took off her slippers and went to bed. Shenluo and clicked a few times on the computer, and then a different picture was played. "Have you seen this movie?" Shenluo and hugged her. "This movie is much better than the one you just watched." Shenmanting looked at the picture that popped up on the computer screen. There were 4 words on it: "Gone with the Wind." For some reason, Shenmanting felt a little disappointed, but she still focused on watching it. The more she watched, the more familiar she felt. She said, "Honey, I've seen this movie." "Okay." Shenluo and answered lightly. "This was your favorite movie. Do you remember what it was about?" Shenmanting only felt that it was familiar, but she couldn't remember what it was about. I forgot, but I'm sure I've seen it. I haven't seen it yet. Watch it with me. Shin Luo and hugged her in his arms and whispered, let me see what your favorite movie is like. Okay. Shin Manting continued to watch. When she saw that the female lead agreed to marry a little boy for Ashley, she felt a little sad and said, will she really marry this person? It's so silly. It's not worth it at all. Shin Luo and hugged her and gently kissed her hair. Yes, it's not worth it. But hadn't Shin Manting done the same thing before? However, Si Jilly was trying to make Shin Manting stay, while Shin Manting was trying to escape. Shin Manting was very serious. Later, when she saw Scarlett starving and freezing, she felt sympathy for her. When he stole his sister's boyfriend for the sake of money, he felt very angry. But what moved Shin Manting the most was the lines that the male lead, Rhett, said when he asked the female lead to marry him. You're marrying either an old man or a child. Why don't you try a real man like me? Shin Manting was a little excited when she read this and said, it's so romantic. How can Rhett be so handsome? Shin Luo smiled and held her hand from under the blanket. He said in a low voice, marry me. His voice was low, and there was a hint of solicitation in it. Shin Manting thought that he was analyzing the plot of the movie, so she happily kissed him on the cheek and said, after that, they got married. Scarlett married Rhett and gave birth to a child named Bonnie Bai. After she finished speaking, she suddenly came back to her senses and asked, how did I know? Because you've seen it before. Shin Luo pressed her down. There are some things that you still remember subconsciously. This is my favorite movie, second to none. Chapter 2074. Because you've seen it. Shin Luo pressed her down. There are some things that you still remember subconsciously. Shin Manting was startled by his sudden movement and blinked her eyes. Then do you still remember whether you love me? Shin Luo stared at her with burning eyes. Follow the truest answer in your heart. Tell me, do you love me? The sound of the movie came to her ears. Through the light on the screen, Shin Manting could clearly see Shin Luo's expression. He was very serious. Shin Manting was in a trance for a moment. She stared at him blankly. Her heartbeat was very clear and dreamy. Seeing Shin Luo, and like this, Shin Manting's heart sank slightly. Her eyes became very clear. She couldn't control a thought that was about to come out. Love. After a long time, Shin Manting answered. There was only Shin Luo's face in her eyes. Shin Manting said seriously, love? Shin Luo's eyes were a little red. He slowly tightened his hold on her and said, say it again. Honey, I love you. Shin Manting was very serious and said word by word, I love you. I really love you. Shin Manting didn't know why when she said these words. Her heart ached faintly. But there was unprecedented satisfaction. Shin Manting hugged him back and looked at the computer screen. She saw Rhett holding Si Jilly and throwing her on the bed to consummate their marriage. Shin Manting was moved. She raised her face and kissed his lips. With shyness, she raised her face and kissed him. Shin Luo's heart softened when she kissed him. In a moment, he became the host and held her firmly in his arms. He went deep and pressed her down on the bed. His arms firmly wrapped around her waist. Shin Luo's kiss became more and more passionate. Shin Manting suddenly felt that he was different again. He seemed to have changed his attitude from this morning. At that time, he seemed to be patient and restrained. But now, Shin Manting could easily feel that he was ready to attack. Thinking of the scene she just saw on the computer screen, she blushed even more. She subconsciously struggled, but Shin Luo seemed to be sure of something. Not only did he not let go, but he also held her hand. Their fingers were interlocked. His warm and rough palms seemed to carry a seductive heat that immediately spread to the bottom of her heart. Shin Manting suddenly felt a little scared. She wanted to push him away, but he easily raised his hand and reached into her pajamas. Shin Luo's fingers skillfully and easily undid the buttons on her back. Shin Manting felt something loosen in front of her, and the aftershock made her tremble. She let out a soft moan. It was a little embarrassing, but Shin Manting couldn't help but tremble slightly under his skillful movements. Their bodies were tightly pressed together, and the scorching heat made Shin Manting blush. Hubby, Shenmanting called out softly, "What do you want?" Shenluo, Anne's eyes were burning with passion. Hearing this, she said, "Didn't you ask me what is missing between us?" Yeah. Shenmanting thought about it for the whole day, but she still couldn't figure out what was missing between them. "Less love," Shenluo, and said these words softly. After a moment, he continued in a hoarse voice, "Do you know the most important difference between a husband and wife and a friend?" Shenmanting was a little confused and shook her head. Chapter 2075. "But you just said it's love," Shenmanting corrected him weakly. Her face was already flushed. Shenluo stared at her and said softly, "Yes, it's called sex." Shenmanting's heart beat faster when she heard the word. She could also clearly feel that Shenluo's heart was beating as fast as hers. "Do you know what sex is?" Shenluo slightly narrowed his eyes. Shenmanting seemed to know, but also seemed to not know. The vague feeling made her shake her head again. Shenluo did not explain, but directly took the computer and directly clicked on the screen that Shenmanting had just seen. He directly fast-forwarded the screen to the most important part, and shameful and intense sounds came from the computer. Shenmanting's head was buzzing, but she could not help but open her eyes wide and look at the screen. "This is sex." Although Shenluo's voice was low, it was very calm. Shenmanting looked at the image on the computer screen and suddenly felt even more uncomfortable. Especially, she wanted a puppy. Shenmanting was a little afraid, but she could not help but look forward to it. "Are you going to do these things to me too?" Shenluo had long been unable to resist, and his tight and hot body pressed against her. He could clearly smell the faint fragrance on her body and the cute look in the corner of the screen, which made it even more difficult for him to control himself. His throat tightened, and he slowly said, "If you are afraid, I will not force you." Shenmanting twisted her body, and a pair of big eyes flashed. Looking at the intense and dazzling scene on the screen, and the sound of slapping made her feel very uncomfortable. Feeling Shenluo's tension, she thought for a moment, and then said softly, "I'm a little afraid, but if I want, I can do it with you. I want." Shenluo did not hide his desire, and deeply pressed against her to let his scorching heat pass to her, and said hoarsely, "But I am afraid." "You are also afraid?" Shenmanting blushed, and her eyes were a little unfocused as she looked at the screen. "If you're also afraid, then let me help you." "Oh, so evil, so shameful." Shenluo reached out and closed the computer. All the light in the room had disappeared. Shenmanting turned around and looked at Shenluo. "I'm afraid that you'll hate me." Shenluo's voice was low and almost ethereal. "I love you." Shenmanting looked at him earnestly and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I won't hate you." "Then, marry me," Shenluo suddenly said. "Marry me, Manting." Shenmanting didn't know what he meant. Could it be that she had not married him yet? However, she had already given birth to the child. Why didn't she marry him? Shenmanting pondered for a moment and asked, "Isn't a husband a husband? Why do you want to marry again?" "No, it's not the same." Shenluo looked at her. "Will you marry me? You'll marry me for real. We'll have a wedding, a marriage, and love." Shenmanting vaguely seemed to understand something. So they had no wedding, no marriage, no love? How could that be? Shenmanting looked at him with a puzzled look in her eyes. "Didn't you love me in the past?" Hearing this, Shenluo immediately said firmly, "Love." Chapter 2076. Shenluo's eyes darkened, and his throat choked. He twitched the corner of his mouth and asked, "Really?" "Yes." Shenmanting nodded and looked at him firmly. "Although I don't remember a lot of things, when you say you love me, I feel very happy." And here, Shenmanting held his hand and placed it on her chest. She said shyly, "It hurts here. My heart hurts." Shenluo couldn't help but be intoxicated by her childlike innocence. At the same time, he felt that he was so despicable. She couldn't remember anything. She didn't know anything. He actually took the opportunity to get the answer he had been longing for a long time. He wanted her. She agreed. She said she loved him. She loved him very much. Although he knew that it was just a child's joke, he couldn't help but want to convince himself that it was true. It was true. He couldn't help but sink his body. Shen Luo's hot kiss fell on her smooth and delicate skin. "Oh," Shen Manting whispered. "Honey, it's so ticklish." Shen Luo didn't stop. He pulled down her pajama pants with his fingers and kissed her passionately and intensely, nibbling her inch by inch. Shen Manting couldn't help but wriggle. She hugged his head and bent her knees. When Shen Luo took off the last of her clothes, the corners of his eyes were already wet. When she woke up one day, would she hate him? Or even hate him more than before? Shen Manting passively fiddled with his hands, and her hands climbed onto his. She endured his passionate kiss, and her body trembled slightly. She couldn't help but shout, "Honey, honey, yes." Shen Luo hugged her and lifted her legs. He lowered his body and said, "I'm here." His voice was low and hoarse, and he couldn't hide his desire. Up. Shen Manting's body tightened. She held him tightly and screamed, "Honey." Shen Luo leaned down and covered her mouth. The hot kiss was overwhelming. She was surrounded by an indescribable passion. Shen Manting had never felt this way before. She was filled with longing, and she felt an urgent need. Her breathing became heavier and heavier, and her lips and teeth were pressed against his. The wonderful and sweet feeling spread all over her body. Soon, she felt like she was being attacked. Shen Manting couldn't control herself and moaned in embarrassment. Shen Luo was so strong that she was firmly confined in his arms. She couldn't help but clamp her legs around him. "Hiss!" Shen Luo took a deep breath. "Relax." Shen Manting was still tense and shouted, "Hubby, hubby, yes, I'm here." Shen Luo gritted his teeth and whispered into her ear, "Manting, hubby, don't hate me." Shen Luo's voice was so low that it was barely audible. Shen Manting's chest tightened, and she felt a little sad. There was no light in the room, but she could clearly see that the corners of his eyes were a little wet. His heart ached. Shen Manting wrapped her arms around his neck, lifted her face, and kissed him gently. "I love you," she said. Shen Luo looked up and kissed her neck even more fiercely. His hands supported her left and right, as if he was afraid of hurting her. His movements were restrained and gentle. Even so, Shen Manting was still a little out of breath. She panted and said intermittently, "I love you, I won't hate you." Chapter 2077. Shen Manting didn't quite understand, but she believed that she would remember what she had said. Shen Luo didn't wait for her to speak and gradually stuffed her words back in her mouth. Shen Manting couldn't say another word except for a low moan that she couldn't help herself. The next day, the baby woke up early in the morning. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." The little baby didn't cry. It seemed that he wouldn't stop until he was called. Shen Manting slept soundly, and her body was strangely sore. However, his heart was very satisfied when she opened her eyes. Shen Luo had already gotten up. He put on his clothes, picked up the baby, and walked into the bathroom. Shen Manting glanced at him and subconsciously wanted to get up, but the layers of soreness on her body made her feel uncomfortable. He moved a little, but his whole body felt very uncomfortable. She looked down and saw a hideous scar on her chest. She pressed it and felt a little painful. She felt a little wronged and lay down again. Shen Manting felt uncomfortable everywhere. "You're awake?" Shen Luo had already put on his pants when he walked back with the baby in his arms. Shen Manting saw him and remembered how she felt last night. She immediately blushed, covered her face with the blanket, and shrunk back. Shen Luo smiled. He let the baby wash up and walked out with the little guy in his arms. Outside, Mrs. Shun had already woken up. Shen Luo saw her and said, "Mom, look after little Moon. I'm going to sleep for a while." Mrs. Shin looked at his bare-chested face and knew that there was something going on. Did he throw the baby out early in the morning and continue sleeping? Shen Luo wasn't someone who would laze around in bed. Mrs. Shun was a little happy. She took her grandson and waved her hand. "Go, go, go." Shen Luo looked at the ambiguous smile on her face and felt a little embarrassed. But he didn't avoid it. He directly locked the child outside and then went in himself. Daddy? Little Moon had never encountered such a situation. He held the little toy in his hands and pouted. Grandma. Mrs. Shin bent down and picked up the little guy. Don't disturb Daddy and Mommy. Let's go. Grandma will take you shopping. Little Moon still looked unhappy. He glanced at the door of the room and followed Mrs. Shin out. Shin Manting curled up in bed and couldn't fall asleep. His body was very uncomfortable, but he felt very happy in his heart. The thick sweetness was like honey, thickly pasted in his heart. Shin Manting turned around when she heard the sound of the door being locked. She saw Shin Luo and walking back. She shrank back and hugged herself completely under the blanket. Shin Luo and chuckled when he saw this. He lifted the quilt and said, Are you hiding from me? Ah. Shin Manting screamed shyly and happily. Don't touch me. Yes, I won't touch you. Shin Luo pressed her down and said in a low voice, I want you. Shin Manting looked at him with bright eyes. When she heard this, she shrank back, but she was already ready to be slaughtered. When Shin Luo saw her like this, he couldn't help but recall that long-lost feeling. Last night, he had done it countless times. In the end, she had begged him not to do it anymore, so he had let her go. Now, Shin Luo leaned forward, pinned her down, and gave her a long, deep kiss. Chapter 2078. Her legs rubbed against him, and she was like a thunderbolt that ignited the fire in the ground. By the time it was over, Shin Manting was exhausted. He held her in his arms and took a bath before she fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up, there was no one beside her. Inexplicably, she was a little flustered. Shin Manting got up, looked around, and called out, Hubby. Yes. Shin Luo, Anne's voice came from the cloakroom. Soon, she saw him dressed neatly. He was wearing a rare formal suit with a tie and a suit. He looked very handsome. Shin Manting's gaze fell on the tie that he had tied. Shin Luo followed her gaze and chuckled. What's wrong? I didn't know a tie was tied like this. Shin Manting was a little frustrated and said, I can tie it properly next time. Shin Luo laughed when he heard that. Soon, he walked forward with a few beautiful women's clothes on his arm. Shin Manting blinked and said, Hubby, are you going to help me put on my clothes? Yes, get up quickly. Shin Luo responded and then put the clothes on the bed. Then, he pulled her up. Shin Manting's body was covered with his marks. It looked scary and ambiguous at the same time. Shin Manting shyly covered her body and said with a red face, Hubby, what are you going to do when you're dressed so handsomely today? Get up and put on your clothes first, and then I'll tell you. Shin Manting was a little curious, but she still agreed. Facing his burning gaze, she felt even more ashamed. She reached out and pushed his face away, saying, Don't look at me. Shin Luo chuckled, but did not move away. He leaned over and kissed her deeply on the lips. Don't be shy. I'll help you put on your clothes. I don't want... Shin Manting shook her head. I'll do it myself. Turn your head away. Seeing this, Shin Luo did not insist and said, In that case, all right. Shin Luo turned his back and packed up the computer from last night. After Shin Manting was sure that he would not peek at her, she quickly put on her clothes. After putting on the dress that he brought over, she stood up and tidied it up. She said, New clothes, hubby. Do they look good? Shin Luo had already finished packing his things. When he heard this, he turned his head to look. It was early spring, and the weather outside was still very cold. Shin Manting was wearing a pink chiffon dress, which made her look elegant and fairy-like. Shin Luo's eyes were a little intoxicated. His gaze was gentle as he gently brushed her hair aside. Beautiful, very beautiful. Shin Luo was telling the truth. But such blatant praise made Shin Manting feel even more embarrassed. Turning around, he picked up his coat and put it on. His coat was a beige coat that looked very clean and tidy. It looked rather dignified and elegant. You're just too skinny. Shin Luo's heart ached for her. He looked at her and said, You have to eat more meat. Shin Manting turned around and combed her hair. I've been eating meat every day. Dad, Mom, Grandma, Julia, and Qian all tell me to eat more meat. I've been eating, and I've become much fatter than before. Indeed, Shinmanting looked much better than when she had just been discharged from the hospital. Her face finally looked a little rounder, but she was still thin. People couldn't help but feel sorry for her figure. However, after combing her hair, she suddenly remembered something. Chapter 2079. Shinmanting blushed and quickly ran into the bathroom. However, her body was already sore, and after running, she couldn't stand it anymore. The strange pain and soreness in her legs almost made Shinmanting lose her balance and fall. Shinluo and reached out to support her, and Shinmanting's face became even redder. She shook him off and walked to the bathroom with strange footsteps. After closing the door, Shinmanting looked in the mirror and found that her neck was full of densely packed marks. It looked a little spectacular, and Shinmanting was successfully frightened. She poked it with her hand and felt a tingling pain. She soaked a towel in hot water and applied it for a while. Her skin was scalded red, but it didn't reduce at all. After washing up, it was already half an hour later. When Shinluo and saw her coming out, he said, "Come here." Shinmanting saw him holding a silk scarf in his hand, and her cheeks were red. She walked over and let him help her put on the silk scarf. After going out, Shinluo and led her to Mrs. Shun. Mrs. Shun was a little surprised and exclaimed, "Manting, why are you so beautiful today? Are you going out?" "Yes," Shinluo replied and said, "Mom, do Manting's makeup. Just light makeup will do." "Why? What are you going to do?" Mrs. Shun smiled ambiguously and said, "You're dressed up so well. Are you going to meet someone? Or are you going to get married?" Shinluo and seemed a little embarrassed and said, "Don't worry about me. You could do her makeup first." Mrs. Shin didn't care and reached out to pull Shinmanting into her room. "Let's go." Manting's makeup skills were better than mine. Shinmanting walked in and saw a pile of brightly colored cosmetics on Mrs. Shun's dressing table. It looked vaguely familiar. After letting her do the foundation, Shinmanting was a little eager to try it out and said, "Mom, I'll try it myself." Mrs. Shun was all smiles. Sure enough, after a while, Shinmanting took matters into her own hands and put on her makeup. However, when she raised her hand, Mrs. Shun glanced at the deep and shallow marks on her neck. It looked quite hideous. When Shinmanting was rubbing her blush, she noticed her gaze and immediately felt a bang in her head. She quickly covered her neck with a silk handkerchief. Madame Shun was also an experienced person. She saw through him but didn't say anything. She said, "Your skills are still so good." "Sigh, I can't do it." Shinmanting was a little embarrassed. She lowered her head and didn't speak. Shinluo An's eyes were filled with amazement when he walked out. Looking at Shinmanting like this, it was as if he was looking at the high-spirited younger sister of the past. In the past, Shinmanting would go out in a glamorous manner every day. She was very capable and was promoted very quickly. He was always dressed in office lady attire, looking mature and steady. But now, the way she looked at him seemed to be a little timid and shy. Her pure and innocent eyes made him feel even more pity for her. "Hubby, I'm done." Shinmanting noticed that he was in a daze and reminded him, "Where are we going?" Shinluo and seemed to come back to his senses and said, "Yes, let's go." As he spoke, he reached out to hold Shinmanting's palm. Shinmanting's cheeks were red as she followed him into the car. Chapter 2080. It was the box for the ring. Shinmanting recognized it, and her eyes sparkled. When she opened it, it was the ring that she had secretly picked up and worn the last time. The ring was in the shape of a beautiful heart. The workmanship was very exquisite, and there was a big pink diamond in the middle. "Did you see it last time?" Shinluo and looked into her eyes. Indeed, there was no surprise in her eyes. Shinmanting nodded. "I saw it, but it was too big." Shinluo and smiled and picked up the ring. "Give me your left hand." Shinmanting extended her hand, and Shinluo and put the ring firmly on the ring finger of her left hand. It was a little wide, but it was much better than the last time. Shinmanting was a little surprised and said, "It's only been a few days. Have I gained so much weight?" "Yes, that was only one of the reasons. Moreover," he had also found someone to fix it. The first ring he made was based on Shin Manting's previous height and weight. If she wore it now, it would definitely be much bigger. Later, he secretly drew it twice while she was asleep and finally decided on the ring. When she gained a little more weight, she would be able to wear it very steadily. Shin Manting was a little happy. She looked at the ring on her hand and said, "It's so beautiful. I just told Qian yesterday that her ring was very beautiful, but now it's my ring that's even more beautiful." The shape of a heart was full of the heart of a young girl. Shen Luo and knew that she would like it. He smiled and said, "Sit tight." He leaned over and fastened the seatbelt for her. Shen Luo and drove in the direction of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Shin Manting was guided the whole time. She signed and took pictures when she was asked to sign. After a series of procedures, when he came out, he received 2 small red booklets. The 3 large words embossed in gold clearly told them what they were there for that day. The warmth warmed Shin Manting's heart as well. "Let's go eat." "Yes." Shin Manting went forward to hold his arm with a red face and said softly, "Honey, I want to eat roast duck." "Okay." When Yi Qianqian and Shun Julia arrived at Yin Town, Yi Jinhua had just woken up. After Yi Qianqian brought her father out for dinner, she went to Fang Tongtong's house to sit for a while. Fang Tongtong's boyfriend was from Qing Town, and his name was Qian Zingxing. Clear Town was about 2 hours away from Cloud Town. Yi Qianqian didn't know if she was mistaken, but she had a feeling that the man didn't like Fang Tongtong that much. Regardless of whether it was before Shun Julia started dating or after they got married, his eyes were always shining when he looked at her. Very bright, very beautiful. Every time she saw him, Yi Qianqian felt that he loved her, and her heart was filled with happiness. However, it was obvious that when the man saw Fang Tongtong, his eyes did not sparkle much. However, it should also vary from person to person, thought Yi Qianqian. They chatted for a while, but before long, Shun Julia came to take her home. Fang Tongtong walked her to the door. When she saw Shun Julia, she looked at Yi Qianqian enviously and said, "Let's go for a walk tomorrow. I have so much to tell you." Chapter 2081. She smiled awkwardly and said, "Well, Tong Tong, let's talk on WeChat if there's anything you need to say. I'll head back first." Yi Qianqian knew exactly where the unhappiness in Shun Julia's heart came from. "Okay, goodbye." Fang Tongtong watched them leave and quickly turned back to go back in. Qian Zingxing was smoking when he saw Fang Tongtong walk in and said, "Is this your best friend? He's quite good-looking and seems to be quite rich." "She's okay. She's good at her job. Her husband's family are all doctors." Fang Tongtong walked in and stretched. "I'm exhausted. If you're tired, let's go to bed." Qian Zingxing walked forward and pulled Fang Tongtong in eagerly. "No." Fang Tongtong was a little resistant. "It's still early. Mom hasn't been feeling well recently. She has to go home and rest early." "It's okay. It's just a cough. It's not a big deal. It's okay." As he said that, he pulled her into the house. Fang Tongtong frowned and resisted, but she couldn't win against him. She was pulled into the house. The next day, they took her father for a checkup. When they found out that it was just a common flu, Yi Qianqian was finally relieved. Shun Julia cooked for them that night. After accompanying the old man for dinner, the couple went to Kingstown on the 3rd day. They hadn't lived in their little nest in Kingstown for a long time. It was covered in a layer of dust. As soon as they entered the house, Yi Qianqian immediately backed out and said, "Lao Shun, let's go to a hotel." Shun Julia replied, "Sure." After finding a hotel to settle down, Yi Qianqian couldn't wait to call Yu Lily. It was almost noon. Yi Qianqian had already informed Yu Lily the night before. When she called, Yu Lily and her family had already found a restaurant. She took a taxi and saw a young girl when she entered the private room. A pair of big, pitch-black eyes like black grapes. Her skin was healthy, white, and tender, and she wore a long-sleeved white top with suspenders. Her soft hair was cut into a pot top, covering her small ears. At this moment, he was hugging a teddy bear and playing on a stool. When Yi Qianqian saw the child, her eyes lit up as if there were light bulbs in them. She cried out, "Xiao Xiao." Oh, Xiao Xiao heard someone calling her and turned to look. When she realized it was Yi Qianqian, her big eyes immediately turned into crescents. She called out, "Auntie Qianqian, oh my God, you're so smart." Yi Qianqian stepped forward and picked Xiao up. She pointed to Shenjulia and asked, "Who is this?" "Uncle." Xiao's eyes rolled around happily as she shouted, "Mom, Auntie Qianqian is here. How could you Lily not know?" She had long heard the commotion outside. He walked out with his arms crossed and snorted. "Yi Qianqian, how dare you try to abduct my daughter the moment you arrive? What are you talking about? Isn't your daughter my daughter?" Yi Qianqian was all smiles. She didn't have the slightest self-awareness that she had invaded someone else's daughter. "Where's your man?" "She'll be here in a bit," Yu Lily said. She leaned in to look at Yi Qianqian and said, "You don't look too well. You look like you've lost weight again. TSK, Shun Julia, how do you take care of your woman?" Chapter 2082. You're the pig. Yi Qianqian looked disgusted. She carried Xiao over and said, "Hit him." Xiao was very clever and said, "You can't hit people. Wow, your daughter is so smart." Yi Qianqian couldn't help but sigh. "My brother's child is a month older than your child, and he can't even speak coherently. It's normal for girls to grow faster than boys," Yu Lily said, but her face was still proud. "Come on, sit down and order. By the way, are you free tomorrow?" "What's wrong?" Yi Qianqian sat down with Xiao in her arms. "Is there something going on?" "Well, I want to take Xiao to the amusement park tomorrow. It'll be more fun with the two of us." Yu Lily handed over the menu, then looked behind them and said, "Why are you only here now?" "There was something at the company, so I took care of it." Ming was wearing a burgundy suit. His face looked thinner and more masculine than 2 years ago. Without any explanation, he carried his daughter away and asked, "Did you miss Daddy?" "Yes." Xiao's crisp voice was young and cute. Ming was satisfied. He turned his face away and said, "Give me a kiss." Xiao kissed him on the cheek, and Ming immediately took out a small toy from his pocket. It was a bouncy ball that changed color when it was shaken. "Wow." Xiao was surprised. Her big eyes were shining, and she shouted, "Thank you, Daddy." Ming's face was full of happiness. He sat down next to Yu Lily with his daughter in his arms. When he saw Yi Qianqian, he seemed a little surprised. "Hey, have you two been working hard again recently? Look at the circles under your eyes." TSK. Yi Qianqian touched her face and felt that something was wrong. She took out a small mirror from her bag and looked at it. "Is my complexion really that bad?" Yu Lily looked at it and said with a straight face, "Actually, it's okay. It's a little better than when you used to stay up late and work overtime for more than a week." Yi Qianqian was speechless. She glared at Shenjulia and raised her leg to kick him. "It's all your fault." Shenjulia felt extremely wronged and shouted, I haven't done anything to you at home these past few days." Only the heavens knew that she had been sleeping like a dead pig for the past 2 days. What would he possibly do? How could he be blamed for this? "You're too noisy. You're affecting my beauty sleep." Yi Qianqian stepped on him again. "You have to compensate me for my youth and beauty." Okay, Shenjulia said with a helpless look on his face. "There's still children around. Don't lead them astray." Ming looked at them and said meaningfully, "Children don't understand. If you want to do something, I won't stop you." Yi Qianqian was speechless. Shenjulia was speechless. After dinner, Yi Qianqian and Yu Lily took the children shopping, while Ming went back to work. Shenjulia pitifully returned to the hotel alone. He picked up his phone and looked for Luo Ran out of boredom. Shenjulia. Luo Ran. Shenjulia. Luo Ran. Is there something wrong with his brain? Shenjulia. Vomiting blood. My wife ran away with another woman. I'm so sad now. Luo Ran. That's great. It just so happens that I have something I need your help with. Shenjulia. I'm going to sleep. Chapter 2083. Shenjulia Luo Zhan. Luo Ran. Well, he has been developing a software recently, and it seems that he has some disputes with his partners. I feel that he is a little negative. Anyway, you have nothing to do. Go talk to him. Shunjulia. Since he had nothing to do, Shunjulia soon arrived at Luo Zhan's company. Luo Zhan was very famous in Kingstown and even in the whole of Huaxia. He was the famous #1 hacker, and Shunjulia had asked him for help several times in the past 2 years. When he arrived, Luo Zhan was busy. There was a bowl of instant noodles in front of him, and he looked very busy. Unlike Luo Ran, who paid great attention to his appearance every day, at this moment, Luo Zhan looked a little slovenly. There was a slight stubble on his chin, and his hair was very short. He looked a little thin. His skin was whiter than Luo Ran's, and he looked like he hadn't slept for several days. He looked like a classic IT nerd. Shunjulia saw his face, which looked exactly like Luo Ran's, and felt a little emotional. "Hello, long time no see." Luo Zhan was surprised. "Why are you here?" "Your brother asked me to see you." Shunjulia didn't stand on ceremony and sat down. "Are you free?" "Well, not really." Luo Zhan was very honest. "I've been crazy busy recently. I'll be free when this project is sold." "Why did my brother ask you to come?" "I came to see you and see your recent mood." Shunjulia looked at his red eyes. "Haven't you slept recently? There are so many things to do every day. How can I have time to sleep?" Luo Zhan smiled. "Well, you sit here for a while. I'll write the code first. I'll forget it later." "Okay." Shunjulia sat on the sofa, but his eyes did not forget to look around. There were several magazines in front of him, one of which had a very young man on the cover. He was dressed in a suit and leather shoes. He looked handsome, had a high nose, and had a strong temperament. On it was written, "The new star of the IT industry." After Z, another new legend, Lu Yihan. After looking through it, there were original software, Qianlu, Cancer, and Baiqing. These software were all particularly famous. The first one was Lu Yihan's early famous software, a mobile music arrangement software. As for Tumor, it was a virus removal software. In recent years, it had become very popular. Baiqing, on the other hand, was an even more optimized and portable software based on the foundation of Cancer. It was highly praised. Shunjulia suddenly recalled that when he had passed by an office desk earlier, he had seen an optimization proposal for absolute purity. So, the person who Luo Zhan recently cooperated with was actually Lu Yihan. Luo Ran had said that he had a dispute with his partner. Could it be that he had a dispute with this person? All right. Luo Zhan walked over with a bottle of water in his hand and handed it to Shunjulia. "Why did you come to Kingstown?" "I brought my wife here to play." Shunjulia didn't stand on ceremony. He uncorked the bottle and took a sip. "Have you been busy with Baiqing recently?" Luo Zhan was startled, and then said, "Yes, I've been doing this optimization recently." "Oh, I heard that you have a good relationship with Lu Yihan. Is he in a hurry? Why are you in such a hurry to get rid of it?" Luo Zhan looked at him and said, "What did my brother ask you to do? What did he say to you?" Chapter 2084. No need. Luo Zhan put it down and smiled bitterly. "It's just that there are too many things to do recently, and I feel a little depressed. When I'm done, I'll feel better." "I see." Shunjulia nodded and quickly changed the topic. But they could talk about anything. Even when talking about work, Luo Zhan was relaxed and humorous. However, when it came to Lu Yihan, Luo Zhan was always a little vigilant. It was like he didn't want to mention it. But Shunjulia didn't notice that he hated Lu Yihan at all. It was a point that made people wonder. After chatting for a while, Luo Zhan continued to work. Shunjulia also got up and left, but when he went back, he told Luo Ran the general situation. Luo Ran was silent for a moment and said, "I suspect that he cheated." Shunjulia said, "You are his brother. It is because he is his brother that I am suspicious. I know him too well. He has never had a serious girlfriend for so many years. Last time, he had a girlfriend, but he dumped her. In the future, whenever Lu Yihan asks him to do something, he will spare no effort to help. How can a brother be like this? According to what you said, should I also suspect that you have come out of the closet?" "Bah!" Luo Ran spat. "I am straight, a man of steel. Recently, I was about to be killed by a woman, and you still suspect that I have come out of the closet?" Shunjulia laughed mercilessly. "I'm not kidding. I think my brother is likely to fall into Liu Yihan's trap. This guy is very cunning. I don't think so. If he really planned to come out of the closet, he wouldn't be in a hurry to get rid of the project. Since he did this, he must want to get rid of Liu Yihan. Don't worry, Luo Ran said. I hope so. When he returned to the hotel, Yi Qianqian was already back. She was lying in bed, playing with her mobile phone. Hearing the sound of the door opening, Yi Qianqian looked up and smiled. Old Shun. Yes, today I went shopping with Lily and passed by a fortune-telling stall, so I want to have my fortune read. Again, Shun Jilya frowned. Why do you always go to fortune-telling? The more you read, the worse your fortune will be. Yi Qianqian felt a little disappointed. I was just curious. I'm already 28 years old this year. According to what they said, I should be able to get pregnant this year. So, I want to do a reading. How so? The fortune teller said that I could get pregnant this year. Yi Qianqian held his hand excitedly. Recently, I've seen a lot of children. I'm so envious. Lily Xiao Xiao is so cute. Her nose and eyes are so similar to her parents. She's so beautiful. Oomph. Shinjilia took off his jacket and shoes and pounced on her. Our children will be like us in the future. Don't be envious of others. We'll have our own children. When Yi Qianqian saw that, she knew what he was up to. She kicked him and said, Go take a bath first. I don't want to wash. I smell good. Bah, go away. I won't do it without bathing. No. If you don't give it to me, I'll use force. How dare you? Yo, you're quite arrogant. Let's see if I dare or not. Oh, he was completely defenseless. Chapter 2085. Yi Qianqian couldn't wake up the next day because of her terrible indulgence the day before. Shun Jilya had wanted to let her sleep a little longer. In the end, she slept from 9 o'clock p.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. She didn't wake up even once. Unable to bear it any longer, he shook her awake and shouted, Wake up! Wake up! You still have to take the child to play with Omingli. Oh, I'll sleep a little longer. Yi Qianqian covered her head with the blanket. 10 minutes. Shun Jilya was speechless. 10 minutes later, when he returned, Yi Qianqian still showed no signs of waking up. Honey, get up. Shun Jilya had no choice but to pull her up. How can you sleep so much? Get up. Well, Yi Qianqian frowned and looked reluctant. I'm not feeling well. I want to sleep. Where do you feel uncomfortable? Sleepy. Shun Jilya had no choice but to say, Get up first. You can come back to sleep when you're done. It wasn't easy for you to come to Kingstown. Don't you want to hang out with Xiao Xiao? Yi Qianqian groggily tried to get up and replied, Yes. Then get up. Yi Qianqian got up with her eyes closed and fell into Shun Jilya's arms. Old Shun, help me get dressed. Shun Jilya felt defeated. He rummaged through the new clothes she had bought the day before. It was a white long-sleeved spring dress. The long shirt and trousers were quite thick. Yi Qianqian allowed him to do whatever he wanted. When she was done changing, she finally opened her eyes and went to brush her teeth and wash her face. By the time she met up with Ming and Lily, it was already past 8 o'clock. By the time they finished breakfast, it was already past 9 o'clock. Yi Qianqian was overjoyed. She smiled and asked, What should you call me? Auntie Qianqian. The crisp voice was accompanied by a smile. I want to eat buns. All right, Annie will feed you. Yi Qianqian smiled happily and picked up a soup dumpling for her. Be careful, it's hot. Oh, Xiao Xiao slowly leaned over and took a bite. As if it was a little hot in the mouth, its little head shrunk back a little. However, it happily leaned forward and took a bite. Is it delicious? And Oh, Xiao Xiao nodded and smiled happily. A pair of big eyes, lying silkworms under the eyes, was very obvious. Her lips were red, and her face was fair and tender. Today, she was wearing a beautiful white dress. Those who didn't know better would think that they were mother and daughter. Ah, she's so cute. Yi Qianqian's heart was about to melt. Old Shun, we want to have a daughter in the future too. Sure. Shun Jilya was inexplicably happy. He looked at the little guy and said, We're going to have 3. That won't do. We have to pamper our daughter like she's a little princess. We have to have 2 sons to protect our daughter. Yi Qianqian fantasized about it. Her heart was filled with joy. That would be perfect. Isn't that what happened to Li Siqing's family? Ming said. In Li Siqing's family, they adopted a boy and gave birth to another boy. D*MN for already? Yi Qianqian's eyes widened. That's so noisy. Yu Lily was a little envious. Their children are all so sensible. I don't know how to raise them. Hey, hurry up and eat. Once you're done, hurry up and go in. Yi Qianqian took Xiao Xiao everywhere and unknowingly got lost. She called Shun Jilia and told him where to find her. Yi Qianqian led Xiao Xiao to sit down at the side. Chapter 2086. In the evening, she grabbed Yi Qianqian's hand and shouted, Auntie Qianqian, I want to eat this. Xiao Xiao was pointing at a big brown bear with a cotton candy stall. Her movements looked a little clumsy, but she looked very cute and attracted the attention of children. All right, Annie will buy it for you. She reached for her purse and waited for Bear to finish making the cotton candy. But when he looked down, he saw Xiao Xiao standing with a child who looked about 5 years old. The child was not well dressed. He wore a mask on his face and looked at Xiao Xiao. Yi Qianqian walked over and took a look. She didn't seem to mind. She held Xiao Zhao's little hand and guided her. Call him little brother. Xiao Xiao was also very polite. She shouted, Hello, little brother. The child glanced at Yi Qianqian and quickly ran away. Yi Qianqian found it a little strange. Why aren't there any adults watching? It was too dangerous for such a small child to run around. But soon, the cotton candy was ready. She reached out to take the cotton candy and handed it to Xiao Xiao. Here, take it. Thank you, Auntie. Xiao Xiao was very happy, holding it in her hand with a smile on her face. Yi Qianqian caressed her little face and chuckled. You're welcome. Let's go back and look for Daddy and Mommy. Yeah. Xiao Xiao licked the cotton candy and held Yi Qianqian's hand. Suddenly, he felt someone approaching him from behind. Yi Qianqian subconsciously turned around. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s. His attire was similar to that of the child from earlier. They were all dirty, but the difference was that this person was striding toward Yi Qianqian aggressively. Yi Qianqian was about to speak when the man suddenly raised his hand and slapped her. Yi Qianqian's face tilted to the side. You F***king be *tch, he scolded in a thunderous voice. You lied to me and said that you're going to work, but in the end, you kept a F***king gigolo and stole my daughter. You're so shameless. Yi Qianqian was confused. She looked up at him and asked, Who are you? Who am I? The man looked fierce and sneered. I am the father of the child. As he spoke, he was about to grab the frightened Xiao Xiao next to him. Human traffickers. That was the only word that popped up in Yi Qianqian's mind. She quickly shielded the child and shouted angrily. Who the F***ck are you? Scram. I don't know you. You don't recognize me? The man was furious. He went forward to drag her over and shouted, You've kidnapped my daughter. Why are you pretending to be an upper class B***tch here? B***tch, stinky whore. As he spoke, he raised his leg and kicked Yi Qianqian hard. Mom. Yi Qianqian heard a child crying. She looked up and saw that it was the child who had been staring at Xiao Xiao. The child was wearing a mask and stood in front of Yi Qianqian to protect her. It was unclear whether he had intentionally or unintentionally wiped his palm across Yi Qianqian's face. When Yi Qianqian caught a whiff of the pungent odor, she felt her nose flush and her head spin. She could clearly hear the child in front of her shouting, Daddy, don't hit my mommy. I beg you. You're still calling her mom. She doesn't even want you anymore. She took away my family's property, kept a gigolo, and kidnapped my daughter. See if I don't beat you to death, you bitch. Chapter 2087. Yi Qianqian stood up with Xiao Xiao in her arms, but before she could steady herself, she was kicked hard. She felt a sharp pain in her head. Caught off guard, she fell heavily to the ground. However, he still protected Xiao Xiao in his arms. Looking around, more and more people were crowding around. Yi Qianqian struggled to get up. She grabbed a man's trousers and shouted, Help me! Help me! I don't know him, Daddy. Xiao Xiao seemed to see Ming. She suddenly shouted and looked ahead. "Daddy, Daddy." The man came forward in exasperation and pulled her hand away without saying a word. Then, Yi Qianqian felt the emptiness in her arms. Oh, Xiao Xiao's cries could be heard. She stretched out her hands in one direction and shouted, "Daddy, Daddy." Yi Qianqian's body was weak, and her brain was heavy. Looking in that direction, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. It was as if a hand was tugging at her womb, causing her limbs to spasm due to the intense sensation of falling, accompanied by a sharp pain. Damn it, why did Aunt Flo come at this time? Yi Qianqian cursed her bad luck. She endured the pain in her stomach and struggled to get up. She chased after the man. She stretched out her hands, trying to catch him. Yi Qianqian grabbed the man's clothes with both hands, but he kicked her away. UB*TCH. F*CK off. The kick was so heavy that it sent Yi Qianqian sprawling on the ground. There was a sharp pain in her waist. A white light flashed in her head, and she cried out in pain. "Qianqian!" A familiar voice called out. It was Oming. "Daddy!" Oh, Xiao Xiao cried loudly and waved her hands at Oming. Oming was shocked and roared, "Let go of my daughter!" Seeing Oming, Yi Qianqian was relieved, but soon the pain in her lower abdomen became more and more obvious. As the heat flowed down, Yi Qianqian's consciousness began to blur. Yu Lily was walking behind him. When she saw Oming's reaction, she immediately ran up. However, he saw Yi Qianqian lying on the ground in the crowd. Yi Qianqian was wearing a white suit that day. At that moment, her lower body was dyed a shocking red. Yu Lily's face turned pale. Her voice trembled as she ran forward. "Qianqian." When she saw Yu Lily, she wanted to get up, but she didn't even have the strength to move her fingers. Tears rolled down Yu Lily's cheeks. She looked at Yi Yu and panicked. "You have to hold on. You have to hold on." Then, he turned around and shouted, "Shunjilia! Shunjilia!" However, no one responded. Yu Lily's hands trembled as she said, "Qianqian, don't be afraid. You'll be fine. I'll take you to the hospital right away." As he spoke, he flipped through his phone with trembling hands and dialed 120. Yi Qianqian looked at her and suddenly felt a little amused. She pretended to be lighthearted and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little dizzy. Also, did you bring any sanitary napkins?" "I might be on my period." When Yu Lily heard this, she broke down and burst into tears. "Don't talk. Shut up." Soon, the ambulance was connected, and Yu Lily quickly reported the address. Shunjilia searched for a long time. He couldn't find the cotton candy bear stall that Yi Qianqian had mentioned. Finally, after asking for directions several times, he finally found this small path. From afar, Shunjilia saw a large group of people gathered together. It looks like she had a miscarriage. It's so pitiful. Chapter 2088. I knew that the little girl was so cute. It was impossible for her to have a father like that. When I saw her real father, I was amazed. He was so handsome. Don't be so infatuated. The people inside are going crazy. It's so tragic. Shunjilia felt terrible when he heard that. Miscarriage? What a pity. The couple had been struggling for 2 years, but there was no result. Others came to an amusement park, and an unborn child was lost just like that. While he was feeling sorry, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Qianqian, hold on." It was Yu Lily's voice. Shunjilia's heart skipped a beat, and he turned to look at the crowd. "Lily?" Shunjilia's voice was very loud. Soon, Yu Lily's voice came from inside. "Shunjilia." Shunjilia was basically sure that she was inside, so he immediately pushed through the crowd and walked in. "Excuse me, please excuse me." Finally squeezing in, Shunjilia saw a cotton candy stall at a glance. However, at the same time, he also saw the person who was surrounded in the middle. Yu Lily's face was full of tears. Holding Yi Qianqian in her arms, she broke down and cried, "Qianqian, boom!" Something seemed to collapse in his mind. It was like being hit hard on the top of his head by lightning. All the blood in his body suddenly flowed backward and rushed to the top of his head. In an instant, Shunjilia seemed to feel that his whole body was cold. His actions were already one step faster than his brain. When he came back to his senses, he was already by her side. At that moment, Yi Qianqian's snow-white suit had become dirty, and the lower part of her body was shocking red. The smell of blood reached the tip of his nose with the smell of rust. Shunjilia's heart was shocked, and suddenly, he seemed to lose his mind. With trembling hands, he wanted to hold her, but he did not dare to act rashly. How could this be? Shunjilia looked at Yi Qianqian in front of him, and his eyes unconsciously reddened. He looked at Lily and asked, "How could this be?" Yi Qianqian had already fainted, but when she heard Shunjilia's voice, she frowned. But she did not wake up. "Honey," Shunjilia couldn't believe what he saw. He took Lily's hand and said, Let's go to the hospital. Don't move. I've already called an ambulance." "Where's the ambulance?" Shunjilia was on the verge of breaking down. He roared with bloodshot eyes. "Where's the ambulance? Why isn't it here yet?" Yi Qianqian's eyelids were very heavy. In her daze, she could clearly feel that something was rapidly slipping away. However, he couldn't see it clearly, touch it, or grab it. "Old Qianqian, don't let anything happen to you. Don't move. We'll be at the hospital soon." Shunjilia's voice was trembling. Yi Qianqian wanted to reach out and grab him. Very quickly, she was firmly held in his hand. She could feel him kissing her hand. It was warm and wet. Yi Qianqian suddenly felt a little sad. The sharp pain in her lower abdomen had paralyzed her nerves. Vaguely, she seemed to have guessed something. Lifting his eyelids with difficulty, he saw nothing but darkness in front of him. 2 rays of dim light pierced the bottom of his eyes. In front of her, Shunjilia's face was stained with blood. It was a blur, and it was difficult to see clearly. Yi Qianqian opened her mouth, and tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes. She asked weakly, "Am I pregnant?" Chapter 2089. It's okay. It's okay. Shunjilia held her hand. His voice was choked with emotion. However, he quickly restrained his emotions. "It'll be fine. You sleep for a while. I'll wake you up later." Yi Qianqian could clearly sense that something was wrong with Shunjilia. Her heart ached terribly, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. He closed his eyes and felt dizzy. However, his senses were so clear. She could feel that she was bleeding. It was fiercer and more ferocious than ever before. The feeling of falling became heavier, and the pain was enough to make one despair. Shunjilia was not usually like this. He wouldn't do that. Why does he look so unsteady? It shouldn't be like this. The pain in her lower abdomen hit her hard. She couldn't help but cry out, "No." Shunjilia had finally managed to calm himself down, but when he heard her crying, he almost broke down again. "Don't cry. Don't cry. It's all right." Shunjilia wiped away her tears, but his voice was muffled and trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and kissed her hand. In a hoarse voice, he whispered, "I'll be fine when we get to the hospital. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Yi Qianqian couldn't help but burst into tears. She held on to Shunjilia's hand tightly. I didn't know. I didn't know he was here. I didn't know I had a child. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. Don't cry," Shunjilia pleaded. "We'll have more. This time, we weren't prepared. He came too suddenly. Next time, we'll definitely protect him well. Be a good girl. Go to sleep first, okay?" Shunjilia looked at Shunjilia. However, Yi Qianqian could not calm down at all. In a weak and sorrowful voice, she said, "I'm sorry. Don't say sorry, Qianqian." At that moment, Shunjilia's voice became extremely clear. His voice trembled slightly, but he was very rational. He said, "Now, I don't want a child. I want you. Nothing can happen to you. I beg you. Sleep first, okay?" His words made Yi Qianqian feel even more pain and discomfort. No one knew better than her how much Shunjilia loved children. It wasn't easy to get this child. If only he had been discovered earlier. If only he had been discovered earlier, he might have survived and become the first baby in their arms. I'm sorry. Yi Qianqian's voice was sobbing, but her consciousness gradually faded. When she woke up again, she could clearly hear the heartbeat. The smell of medicine rushed to the tip of her nose. She moved, and open her eyes. The light in the room was dazzling. Yi Qianqian frowned and narrowed her eyes. "You're awake?" Shenjilia asked. "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Yi Qianqian was a little dazed when she heard his voice. Waves of pain came from her stomach, stinging every nerve in her body. Julia Shun's hard as if it was, and he felt. Yi, Shun, he, as he. Holding her hand, he averted his reddened eyes and said, "I'll call the doctor." Chapter 2090. Shenjilia didn't make sound. He bent down and kissed her gently on the forehead. Then he took her hand away. He whispered, "Wait a minute. I'll ask the doctor to examine you." Soon, Shenjilia went out. When Yi Qianqian saw his reaction, she knew the answer. She seemed to have lost all her strength. Lying on the bed, Yi Qianqian's vision suddenly blurred. When the doctor came in, Yi Qianqian was looking at the ceiling with tears streaming down her face. After checking everything was fine, Yi Qianqian was already sobbing. Shenjilia didn't make sound. He sat quietly beside her and held her hand tightly in his. "I'm sorry," Yi Qianqian said with a strong nasal voice. "I'm sorry, old Shun. I'm sorry." Shenjilia stood up, leaned over, and kissed her deeply, gently and tenderly. Shenjilia quickly let go and looked at her condescendingly. Yi Qianqian's tears were like a raging spring, flowing down uncontrollably. At that moment, her eyes were already red and swollen as she looked at him. "We were not prepared." Shenjilia looked at her. "No one expected him to come at this time. It's not your fault. It's me. If I had been by your side at that time, this would never have happened. I'm the one who should say sorry. Honey, I'm sorry." Yi Qianqian's tears flowed even more fiercely. She immediately raised her hands and hugged him, letting herself cry even more. Shenjilia's eyes were filled with warmth. He gently patted her shoulder and it didn't make a sound. "Qianqian." A soft female voice came quietly. Shenjilia looked sideways and saw Yulili. Yulili walked in with a little girl in her hand, followed by Oming. Behind Oming, there were two big men. Each of them carried one person and were quickly thrown to the ground. Yi Qianqian looked sideways. Wasn't it the man who pretended to be her husband and wanted to abduct the child and beat her until she had a miscarriage? The man had a swollen nose and a swollen face, and his hands and feet didn't look nimble. After being thrown by the big man, he was immediately trampled on the ground like a useless dog. The other one was the child, who cooperated with the man. However, the mask on the child's face was gone. It was a mature man's face, but it was now bruised. "Let me go. I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had known, I wouldn't have dared to hit her even if I had 100 guts." The man who was thrown down immediately cried and kowtowed. I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. I won't dare to do it again. This time I was just possessed." Before he could finish speaking, Oming kicked him hard on the neck, and he fell to the ground. Oming's expression was fierce, and he didn't hold back his strength as he stomped on the ground. "You don't dare? I'm afraid I won't dare to do it if I die." That person was trampled on the ground, and his face was already green and red. "Enough. Hand us over to the police if you have the guts. We can sue you for abusing justice." The kid said. His voice was that of a mature man. Oming loosened his foot and kicked him hard in the chest. The man, who was as thin as a child, was kicked to the ground, his face full of pain. "Apologize," Oming growled. "You dare to hit anyone? Are you tired of living?" His face was fierce, and his voice was fierce. As soon as he finished speaking, the big man who had just beaten them to the point where they couldn't get up took 2 more steps forward. He was full of deterrence. Chapter 2091. I'm sorry. The 2 men got up and kowtowed in Yi Qianqian's direction. "We won't do it again. Please forgive us." The 2 men looked like they were on the verge of collapsing. It seemed that they had been beaten up badly. Yulili held her daughter's head, not letting her see or hear. Her eyes were red and swollen. Looking at Yi Qianqian, who was still indifferent on the bed, her heart ached. Send them to the police station, Shun Julia said indifferently. Ming, how long can you let them be sentenced? When Ming heard that, he knew what he meant. Don't worry. They won't be out for at least 20 or 30 years. Ming looked at them coldly. Take them away. Yes. The two bodyguards each took one of them away. The two men shouted unwillingly. Be *starred. Why do you have to do this? You think you're so great just because you're rich? Let's go. Yi Qianqian closed her eyes and turned her head away. Qianqian, I'm sorry. Yu Lily's voice was choked. If I had taken care of the child myself, it would have been better. I gave the child to you. I'm sorry. I hurt you. You can scold or hit me. I'm sorry, Qianqian. Lily, Shenjulia said. It's my fault. Don't blame yourself. If I had followed them closely, nothing would have happened. If I hadn't asked you to go out to play, nothing would have happened. Yu Lily held her daughter and guided her. I'm sorry to Annie Qianqian. Annie Qianqian, I'm sorry. Xiao Xiao pouted and looked aggrieved. If I didn't eat Tang Tang, it would have been fine. The little girl's face was tense, and she almost cried. Her eyes were red. She looked up at her mother and said, Mom, call me godmother. Ming walked forward and picked Xiao Xiao up. If it weren't for Qianqian today, you would have been taken away by the bad guys today. You might have been killed and never seen your parents again. Auntie Qianqian is your second parent. From now on, call Annie Qianqian godmother. Godmother. Xiao Xiao pouted and called out. Yi Qianqian couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She turned her head and saw that they all had solemn expressions on their faces. You don't have to do this. Yi Qianqian looked at them. It's me. If I hadn't brought her around, we wouldn't have met those two people, and we wouldn't have gotten lost. Nothing would have happened to us. His voice was very low, so low that it was barely discernible. When he heard Yi Qianqian's words, he held her hand. There's no such thing, Ming said. There's no such thing as knowing everything in advance. You saved Xiao Xiao, so you're her savior. If you don't want to be her godmother, that's fine. Qianqian, we're truly grateful to you. It was the first time Ming had spoken to Yi Qianqian in such a serious manner. The moment he opened his mouth, he said it in such a manner. Yi Qianqian felt a little emotional. Looking sideways, Ming had already walked over with his daughter in his arms. Call her godmother. Godmother. Yi Qianqian suddenly chuckled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. With a smile on her face, she teased. In that case, I've earned a daughter. She propped herself up and tried to sit up. Shen Juliet quickly went forward to help her up. Xiao Xiao went forward and wiped her face with her tiny hands. She said, Godmother, don't cry. Chapter 2092. Xiao Xiao didn't quite understand. She looked up at her parents. Yu Lily's eyes were red, but there was a smile on her face. Xiao Xiao didn't understand, so she turned back. Xiao Xiao didn't quite understand, so she turned around. Xiao Xiao didn't understand, so she turned back. That was good. Yi Qianqian's release was the best ending. The child came suddenly. Although it was a pity, no one expected it. Shenjia suddenly remembered what his grandmother had said a few years ago. There will be a disaster at 28. Maybe it was the disaster they were talking about. It was a good thing to face it. It was better than always worrying about when it would suddenly come. Shenjilia looked away. Suddenly, his phone rang. He picked it up and saw that it was from his grandmother. Shenjilia didn't avoid it. He picked it up and said, Grandma. Julia. Old Mrs. Shun's voice sounded a little sad. Did something happen to Qianqian today? Shenjilia was stunned and looked at Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian looked back. She seemed to have guessed something. Yeah, Shenjilia replied. How did you know? Old Mrs. Shun sighed. Fate. Shenjilia was silent when he heard that. Yi Qianqian looked at him and asked, What did Grandma say? Shenjilia didn't answer. He said to the old woman on the phone, Yeah, so what happened to Qianqian? Old Mrs. Shen asked. I'm getting more and more useless. It was Dongfang who told me that something happened to Qianqian. Sigh, something happened. I'll tell you later. Go to bed early. Goodbye, Grandma. Julia. Old Mrs. Shun wanted to say something. But before she could say it, Shun Julia hung up the phone. Yi Qianqian looked at him and asked, Does Grandma know? I don't know. Shun Julia looked at her. I know that something happened to you, but I don't know what it is. Yi Qianqian lowered her head and answered, yeah. Are you hungry? What do you want to eat? I'll buy it. Ming looked at them. You're my daughter's godmother. I can't treat you badly. Yi Qianqian smiled and said, thank you, but I have no appetite now. Let's go back first, Yu Lily said. Qianqian needs to rest. Let's not disturb her here. Yeah. Ming said, that's true. Qianqian isn't in a good state. Let's go back first and visit her tomorrow. All right. In that case, old Shun will be leaving first. Ming came forward and carried his daughter over. If you need anything, remember to call us. All right. Finally, he left. Yi Qianqian was exhausted. Shun Julia walked over and gently pulled her into his arms. Sleep for a while, he said. Yeah. Yi Qianqian closed her eyes and fell asleep with his help. However, she quickly closed her eyes and said, hubby. Yes. What if? Yi Qianqian's voice trembled and her tears fell. What if I can't get pregnant in the future? Don't let your imagination run wild, Shun Julia said with a frown. You're the only one with a rich imagination. How can you live a good life? Yi Qianqian sniffled, wiped her face, and turned her head away. Shun Julia sighed softly, but then he received another call from his family. It was Shun Luo, and when he picked up the phone, he heard the sound of the wind. Shun Julia frowned and said, hello. Shun Luo, and was driving and hadn't reached home yet. At that moment, he was in a great mood and taking Shun Manting for a ride. I'll update chapter 31 first and continue during the day. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to sleep. If you're done, you can go read the new book, 99 Days of Hidden Marriage, Prima Donna, Please Be Reserved. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 2093. Shun Julia's voice was clearly a little low. It sounded like he was in a very low mood. When Shun Luo heard her voice, he swallowed the good news that was on the tip of his tongue and asked, what's wrong with you? Grandma told you? What's wrong? Shun Luo felt that something was amiss. What did Grandma tell me? I'm outside with Manting. We haven't returned home yet. Shun Julia was in a very low mood. When he heard this, he simply replied, yeah, not a good mood. Did you quarrel with your wife? Only Yi Qianqian could make the usually happy-go-lucky Shun Julia so depressed. Shun Luo had a premonition that he had already guessed correctly. He comforted her and said, it's common for a married couple to quarrel. Be nice and apologize to Qianqian. There's nothing wrong with that. Shun Julia said nothing. Shun Luo was even more certain of that. To avoid making him even more unhappy, he changed the topic and said, I came out with Manting today. We went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. He glanced at Shun Manting and said, we're married. Shun Manting couldn't help but be influenced by Shun Luo's cheerful expression. Looking at the two little red books in his hands, he was in a very good mood. When Shun Julia heard this, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. He forced a smile and said, I've finally succeeded. Is Sister Manting by your side? Yes. Shun Luo was in a great mood. I'll take her out for a ride. Yes, congratulations. Are you preparing for the wedding? As Shun Julia spoke, he sensed Yi Qianqian's gaze on him from the bed. Yi Qianqian seemed to have guessed what was going on and asked, are you married? Shun Julia nodded his head and replied, yeah, I went to the Civil Affairs Bureau today. Yeah, it's pretty good. Congratulate Big Brother on my behalf. Yi Qianqian's voice was very soft, and her throat was a little hoarse. Finally, the clouds have parted to reveal the moon. Get some sleep. Shun Julia gently stroked the hair on the side of her face. I'll go get some dinner. I haven't had dinner yet. What's wrong? Shun Luo finally sensed that something was wrong. Did you two quarrel? What happened to Qianqian? Shun Julia's heart ached when he heard this. He tucked Yi Qianqian in and said softly, I'm going out to make a call. Wait for me to come back. Yeah. Yi Qianqian closed her eyes. Shun Julia turned off the lights and closed the door behind him. He gave the nurse some instructions before walking out of the hospital. Shun Luo had been waiting all this while. He had a bad feeling about this. Something happened to us. What is it? She met a human trafficker who drugged her. She was beaten up and found out she was pregnant. Shun Luo was shocked and couldn't help but tense up. That child, I couldn't. Shinjilia's voice was low. It was so deep that it was almost hopeless, and it made people feel sad. Shinluo and fell silent. The joy on Yi's face disappeared. Shinmanting noticed that he had suddenly become serious and couldn't help but ask, "Honey, what's wrong?" Shinluo and shook his head and asked Shinjilia, "Have you caught the culprit?" "Yes, Ming is handling it." However, the lost child could never come back. Shinjilia's heart sank. He reversed the car into his own yard before turning off the engine and stopping. "Do Mom and Dad know?" "I haven't told them yet." Shinjilia sighed heavily. "Grandma just called me. She's old, and I'm afraid she'll be sad. Can you help me find an excuse?" Dash. Chapter 2094. I haven't told them yet. Shinjilia sighed heavily. "Grandma called me just now. She's getting on in her years, and I'm afraid she'll be upset. Can you help me find an excuse to brush her off?" Shinluo, An's mood became very heavy. He let out a long sigh and closed his eyes. How many more days are you going to stay in Kingstown? When Qianqian is almost better, we'll go back, but it might not be that soon. Grandma doesn't know what happened to Qianqian. I know, but I don't know the specifics. If Grandma asks, just say that you fell and need to be hospitalized. We will return to the capital in a few days. He helped Shun Manting unfasten her seatbelt before getting out of the car. Shun Manting watched as Shinluo and hung up the phone. She hurriedly chased after him and asked, "Hubby, what's wrong?" Shinluo and looked at the two little red booklets in her hands. When he read them just now, they were filled with joy, excitement, satisfaction, and happiness. But now it was complicated. He gently hugged her and whispered, "Something unfortunate happened to Qianqian and Jilia." Shin Manting could feel his sadness. She reached out and gently hugged him. She asked curiously, "I just heard you mention the child. What's the matter?" Qianqian and Jilia have been married for more than 2 years. They've always wanted a child. Shinluo's voice was a little slow and hoarse. But something happened today. Qianqian accidentally had a miscarriage. Shin Manting was shocked, and her body trembled. Miscarriage. Shin Manting's heart ached when she heard those words. She pushed him away in disbelief. How could this be? Shinluo sighed softly. "I'm not too sure about the specifics, but I'm guessing that Grandma has already guessed it. So if Grandma asks later, don't say anything. I'll explain it to her. You have to be happy and tell Mom, Dad, and Grandma that we're married. Okay?" Shin Manting nodded. "Got it. I'll only report the good news and not the bad." "Okay." Shinluo smiled and couldn't help but kiss her on the lips. Then he said softly, "Let's go in." Shun Longyue and his wife sat in the living room with old Mrs. Shun. Little Moon was playing with his toy car in the open space in the living room. When he saw them coming back, he jumped up happily and shouted, "Daddy! Mom!" She dashed forward with her tiny feet in her tiny shoes and hugged his thigh. Shinluo bent down and picked up the baby. She tapped the baby's nose and said, "Are you listening to the adults at home?" Little Moon sounded like he was asking for credit. "Little Moon, be a good boy." Shinluo smiled and turned to look at the elders. Shinlongyue was fine, but the two women couldn't hide the worry on their faces. Old Mrs. Shun's face was full of anxiety as she said, "Luoen, I just called you. Why was the line busy? Did you call Jilia?" He nodded and sat down on the sofa with the infant in his arms. "Yeah. Jilia just told me that Qianqian had a fall in Kingstown and will need to be hospitalized for a few days. She's not in a good mood, so I didn't tell you much." When old Mrs. Shun heard that, she had an expression that said, "I knew it." She asked anxiously, "Where did you fall? It's not serious, right? What's the situation now?" "It's nothing. It's nothing serious." Shinluo glanced at them. "Why do all of you look so worried? If Jilia says it's nothing, then it's nothing." Chapter 2095. Mrs. Shin looked worried. She looked up and saw Shun Manting's hand. That pair of white and tender hands held a smear of red. She looked carefully and saw that it was 2 red booklets. Mrs. Shun was shocked. She seemed to have guessed something and asked, "Manting, what are you holding?" Shenmanting saw that she had noticed and looked up at Shenluo and gave her a reassuring look. Then Shenmanting said, "Mom, this is the marriage certificate." Marriage certificate? This time, it wasn't just Mrs. Shun. Even Shun Longyue and old Mrs. Shun looked over. Old Mrs. Shun stood up and said, "Marriage certificate? Who's married? Are you married?" Shenmanting had never seen such a scene before. She felt inexplicably nervous when she saw the elders of the family coming over. Mrs. Shun's face relaxed, and with a hint of coaxing, she said, "Come, let Mother take a look." As she spoke, she stretched out her hand. Shenmanting placed the warm little notebook in her hand and withdrew her hand in a flash. Mrs. Shun felt the warmth on the booklet and couldn't hide the joy on her face. She opened it and saw a photo. Wasn't it Shenluo and Shenmanting? Shenluo and Shenmanting's dates of birth were written on it, along with their ID numbers. Mrs. Shun was delighted and said, "Mom, look." Old Mrs. Shun leaned over and saw the words on the booklet. She slapped her thigh and cheered, "Luoin, you little rascal." Shen Longyue also came forward and confirmed the marriage certificate with a faint smile on his face. Shenmanting felt a little scared. Why does it feel like a little white rabbit in a wolf's den? She felt like she was being surrounded by a pack of wolves. It felt like she was going to be devoured by them at any time. She reached out and tugged at Shenluo and sleeve and said, "Hubby, Mom, Dad, and Grandma seem very happy." Shenluo smiled and reached out to hug her. He whispered, "Of course we're happy. We're a married couple from now on." Shenmanting felt that something was amiss. She nodded and said, "Yes." Old Mrs. Shun was undoubtedly the happiest of them all. She immediately took out an almanac and said, "In that case, I'll take a look at this year's auspicious date and organize your wedding." Yes, and we have to make it big." Mrs. Shun was very happy. You don't know how many people are saying that Luo and is in his 30s and still unmarried. His child is already 2 years old. Now it's all good. The whole family is together and happy. As he spoke, he stepped forward and held Shenmanting's hand. He sighed and said, "From now on, live a good life with Luoin. No matter what, this is your home." Shenmanting felt even more uncomfortable. But in his heart, he did not feel the slightest bit of joy. It was as if he was shrouded in a huge conspiracy. She was completely unaware that she was in the middle of this huge whirlpool. This feeling was very uncomfortable. Shenmanting wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. He pursed his lips and said, "Mom, I'm tired. Hey, I'm sleepy." Mrs. Shin quickly let go of Shenluo and reached out to pat him. "Did you hear that? I'm sleepy." This made Shenluo chuckle. He stood up and gently held Shenmanting's hand. He said, "Little Moon will sleep with you tonight." Chapter 2096. His voice was full of joy and laughter. Mrs. Shun was not the only one. Almost the whole family was very, very happy. Shenmanting felt that something was wrong. She looked at her hand that was held by Shenluo and lowered her head slightly. When they returned to the room, Shenluo unlocked the door behind him. Shenmanting held Shenluo's hand and felt a little nervous. She looked up and saw Shenluo's amber eyes that were smiling. "Honey, we weren't married before, right?" Shenmanting looked at Shenluo and asked, "Then why do I call Mom and Dad and Grandma before we're married?" His eyes were clean and pure. The doubt in them was very obvious. Shenluo was stunned for a moment by such a question. "Honey, I think I'm very familiar with them. I seem to remember that I used to call them that too." Shenmanting's words carried a moderate amount of doubt, but it was just doubt. But in Shenluo's ears, it was like a knock on the door, getting louder and louder. He didn't know whether to open the door or not. If he opened it, what would he be facing? If he didn't open it, as long as she continued to knock, one day, it would open. Looking at Shenmanting, Shenluo's lips moved, and then he said, "We just haven't registered our marriage, but our relationship is no different from that of a normal husband and wife. So, my parents are your parents, my grandma is your grandma, and my brother is your brother." Shenmanting nodded and added with a smile, "Your son is my son." Shenluo and chuckled and reached out to hold her waist. He whispered, "I'm also yours." His gaze was very deep and intense. Shenmanting could clearly feel that he cared for her and loved her. Her cheeks were slightly hot. Shenmanting held his arm with both hands, slightly tiptoed, and quickly kissed him. However, when she was about to withdraw, Shunluo caught her. He tightened his grip around her waist. He kissed her deeply. Shenmanting responded with some difficulty, and her hands clung to him more tightly. Shunluo kissed her and soon fell on the bed with her, kissing her. The fiercest and most primitive instincts easily stirred up the fire in their bodies. Shenmanting felt satisfied and blissful as he pressed down on her. The moment he sank into her, her heart fluttered. She couldn't help but hug him tightly. Instinctively, uncontrollably, she called out, "Shunluo," and Shunluo's body stiffened when he heard the indistinct voice. Shenmanting noticed that he had stopped moving and felt a little impatient. She opened her eyes and looked at him, but she found that Shunluo's expression was a little dark. He couldn't understand. He couldn't see through it. "Hubby?" Shenmanting's eyes were blurred as she looked at him in confusion. Shunluo seemed to have thought of something, and his body moved away slightly. Then, he suddenly slammed into her. She burst into tears and clutched his shoulders tightly. She couldn't help but let out a short cry. "Ah, call me husband." Shunluo leaned forward and planted a passionate kiss on her neck. "Manting, I love you," he said in a low voice. "Grand Duke." Shenmanting hugged him tightly and said breathlessly, "I love you too." Chapter 2097. Shenmanting didn't know when she fell asleep. In a daze, she seemed to notice that Shunluo was helping her bathe. In a daze, she was woken up twice. It was not until the second half of the night that she finally stopped. However, in the second half of the night, she seemed to have a terrible dream. She dreamed that Shunluo reeked of alcohol. He tore her clothes and pressed her violently against the washstand in the bathroom. He brought her into the abyss again and again. The tearing pain made her heart wrench. Such a dream was too real. Shenmanting's heart ached. She couldn't help but grab him and cry, "Brother, don't," but he was still indifferent. What awaited her was inhuman torment, the despair of not being able to see the light of day, and his cruelty. "Please don't do this to me, don't." Shenmanting seemed to have a nightmare. Her hands fluttered, and a low whimper came from her side. When Shunluo opened his eyes, Shenmanting's face was already covered in tears. He reached out and gently patted her. He whispered, "Don't be afraid, Manting." However, the next moment, he clearly heard her talking in her sleep. "Brother, don't." His heart suddenly skipped a beat, and Shunluo was alarmed. He felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him, from the top of his head to the bottom of his heels. He hurriedly reached out and picked her up. He shook her gently and said, "Manting, wake up." Shunluo shook her a little too hard, and she quickly opened her eyes. Shenmanting was a little confused when she saw the darkness around her. Shunluo held her tightly in his arms. "Hubby." Shenmanting was confused and called out to him. The tension in Shunluo's body was released at that moment. Shunluo's back was already covered with a thin layer of sweat when he relaxed his body. "Well, it's okay. It's just a nightmare." Shunluo gently patted her and said softly, "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Shenmanting was really afraid. Tears gushed out of her eyes. She hugged him and said, "Hubby, I just dreamed of something terrible. Don't be afraid. Dreams are fake." "Yes." Shenmanting couldn't help but tremble with fear. "Nightmares are always the opposite. My husband would never treat me like that." Shunluo's body stiffened. His heart felt like it was being clutched tightly. Shunluo felt an indescribable sense of regret and sadness in his throat. He hugged her tightly and buried his face in her neck. Shenmanting was tickled by his breath. She shrank back and said shyly, "Hubby, I'm so sleepy." "Okay," Shunluo said in a low voice. "Go to sleep." Shenmanting nodded in satisfaction. She wrapped her arms around his narrow waist and said, "Hubby, I feel so happy." Her words, which caught Shinluo off guard, were like a heavy weight pressing down on his heart. He lifted his head and kissed the corner of her eye. "Me too. I'm so happy to have you by my side." The smile on Shun Manting's face widened, and she fell into a deep sleep. Under the quilt, a pair of hands wrapped around his waist, and her breathing gradually calmed down. However, she didn't notice that there were tears overflowing from the corner of his eyes. The night was quiet. The room was dark. Chapter 2098. His faint voice sounded particularly lonely in the quiet night. The next day, when Shin Manting woke up, she found that Shun Luo was already gone. She had already put on her clothes. Shin Manting got up, and her legs were even more sore. After washing up, she found a nice set of clothes to change into. Shin Manting was in a good mood. She was wearing a beautiful pink dress that fit her well. Shin Manting almost couldn't recognize herself in the mirror. She combed her hair bit by bit and carefully tied it into a bun. She didn't remember who had told her that she looked cute with a bun. She looked in the mirror to make sure that she looked beautiful before walking out. But when she came out, she found that Shin Luo had already left for work. She was greatly disappointed. His good mood seemed to have been doused with a bucket of cold water at this moment. "Did I sleep too late? My husband went to work without waiting for me." Shin Manting was a little unhappy. She looked at her toes and said, "If I had known, I would have gotten up earlier." Seeing her like that, he couldn't bear to see her like that. She explained, "Young master received several calls early this morning. It seemed that there was a problem in the laboratory. It was very urgent, so he went to work first. He asked me to inform you when you woke up." "Really?" Shin Manting's eyes were filled with a little light again. "What about Little Moon?" "Old Madam took him out to play." He looked at her and smiled. "Go and sit for a while. Lunch will be ready soon. You can call and ask when Shun Luo will be back for lunch." Shin Manting's eyes lit up. She nodded and said, "I'll go now." Her pink dress was like a pink butterfly spreading its wings in spring. Her steps were light and happy, and she looked carefree. He looked at Shin Manting and sighed softly. She whispered to herself, "If only it could always be like this." Unfortunately, she had to face reality sooner or later. She heard him talking to Shun Julia on the phone in the morning. Shin Manting's situation was very unstable. If the nightmares continued, it was very likely that she would regain her previous memories one day. That meant what seemed to be a peaceful and happy facade now would be punctured. The seemingly beautiful relationship between Shun Luo and Shin Manting might return to how it was in the past. He felt a little sad when he thought of the scene that might happen in the future. His gaze turned to the lush green grass outside the window, and his emotions were very complicated. Shin Manting returned to her room and picked up her cell phone to call Shin Luo. He dialed twice before the other side picked up. "Hubby," Shin Manting called out sweetly. "Are you busy?" "I'm not too busy right now," Shin Luo said. His voice was emotionless. "Did you miss me?" Shin Manting blushed when she heard this. He thought about it. He really wanted to. However, it was too shameful to say such words. She thought for a moment, then pouted and said, "Why didn't you call me? I haven't shaved your beard yet." There was a moment of silence on the other side of the phone. Then he heard a smiling voice. "It's not every day that you get to shave. Have you eaten?" Chapter 2099. Well, okay. Shin Luo agreed, and Shin Manting's heart was even sweeter. "Do you want to eat cake?" Shin Luo asked. "I'll bring you one when I come back." Cake. Shin Manting hadn't heard this word for a long time, and she almost drooled. When she was young, she rarely ate cake. She could only see a very small piece on Mei Fang's birthday. However, she didn't know when her birthday was, so she never had a birthday and never had a birthday cake of her own. Hearing this, Shin Manting was greedy and excited and asked, "Is it my birthday today?" Shin Luo seemed to be laughing, and he said softly, "Must you eat cake on your birthday? Then I won't buy it." No, no, of course not. Shin-Manting quickly straightened up, but soon realized that she was too anxious and felt a little embarrassed and said, I want to eat it. Wait for me at home. Shin Luoen's voice was full of indescribable gentleness. I'll be there in half an hour. Okay. Shin-Manting was in a hurry. Hurry up. I'll wait for you. I'm hanging up. Hurry up. Okay. Shin Luoen agreed, and the phone was hung up. Shin-Manting quickly threw the phone on the bed and immediately got up and went to the bathroom to tidy up her messy hair. After tidying up her dress, she patted her face and walked out contentedly. But suddenly, she remembered that there was still half an hour. She went back to the room, took out the computer, and opened the movie she watched last time. Gone with the Wind, after clicking on it, the web page automatically jumped to the last time she watched it. Shin-Manting put the computer on the coffee table and was very fascinated. When she saw Rhett get drunk and rape Si Jelly, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. The scene changed, and it was already the next day. Si Jelly sang and stretched, and she was in a very good mood. When a servant came to help her change, Si Jelly asked, "Where is he?" Shin-Manting then realized. Si Jelly didn't know that she loved Rhett at first. Unfortunately, after he forced himself on her, he clearly realized his own feelings. How silly. Shin-Manting felt sorry for Scarlett. Don't you know who you love? They had been married for so many years, and their children were already so big. The stone should be warm by now. But Scarlett still thought that she was deeply in love with Ashley. However, Rhett believed it. His cold and distant attitude towards her maid Scarlett, who had always been flattered, feel heartache. However, she couldn't swallow her pride and admit defeat to him. Rhett had always thought that this marriage was just his own wishful thinking. Therefore, he poured all his love into his daughter. Even the love he had for Scarlett had been given to Bonnie Bai. However, after Bonnie White's accidental death, Rhett completely broke down. Shin-Manting sat on the sofa and cried out loud. When Nanny saw her, she frowned and came up to her. What happened? Dead. Shin-Manting wiped away her tears. Their daughter is dead. The male lead is so pitiful. He thinks that the female lead doesn't love him. Sob. Nanny said, It's time to eat. Stop looking. Just then, the doorbell rang. Shin-Manting immediately closed the laptop, stood up, and rushed to open the door. Chapter 2100. Shin-Manting's lithe figure caught Nanny's attention. He couldn't help but curl his lips into a smile. Then, he turned his head away and didn't look at them anymore. Shin Luoen was startled, but soon, the faint fragrance made him smile slightly. He reached out and hugged her. He could easily feel her excitement, her joy, and her excitement. You're back. Shin-Manting looked up at him with an excited and happy smile. Where's the cake? Shin Luoen deliberately kept a straight face and said, I thought you missed me, but it turns out that you were only thinking about your cake. Shin-Manting didn't feel embarrassed at all. She smiled excitedly and couldn't help but jump up and say, Quick, quick, the cake. Shin Luoen noticed that her eyes were a little red. Did you cry? Shin Luoen gently stroked her face and looked at her pitifully. Shin-Manting pouted and said, I was watching a movie just now. It's the war romance we watched the other night. Bonnie Bai died. I'm so sad. Shin Luoen couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He said the movie is fake. How can you cry after watching it? Well, Shin-Manting's eyebrows drooped. The movie is fake, but the feelings I put into it were real. Although it's fake, I'm still so sad, so sad. Shin Luoen didn't know what to think when he heard this. He looked at her for a while and then replied, Okay. He took out the cake and placed it on the table. I bought 4 flavors in one. There's chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and matcha. Shin-Manting felt her mouth water just by listening to it. She couldn't wait and said, Quick, 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 I want to eat the cake. Let's eat first, Nanny said. Mr. and Mrs. Shun aren't coming home today, and old Mrs. Shun took Little Moon out to play. We're the only ones eating at home. There will be leftovers later. Eat a few bites first. It's okay. Shin Luoen opened the cake and revealed an exquisite 4-colored cake inside. There were a variety of beautiful fruits on top. As soon as the cake was opened, the fragrance overflowed. Shenmanting's mouth was almost watering. Her thumb moved quickly. Shenluo and picked up a small plastic knife and cut a piece. He asked, "What flavor do you want?" "Strawberry." Shenmanting replied without hesitation. Shenluo and had already expected it. After he cut a piece, Shenmanting immediately took it. He picked up his fork and took a bite. Shenmanting's face was full of happiness. She stomped her feet excitedly and said, "It's delicious." "Then eat more." Shenluo and looked at her with a smile. "But remember to eat. You can't just eat cake until you're full." "Yes, yes," Shenmanting answered. However, a promise was a promise. In the end, he couldn't help but eat 2 more pieces. After tasting the chocolate and vanilla flavor, he stopped giving her the matcha flavor when it was her turn. "Let's eat first. Don't eat cake. Eating cake alone is not good for your stomach." Shenluo and finally stopped her. Shenmanting looked at the cakes reluctantly and finally picked up the rice on the table. After the meal, Shenmanting didn't feel like watching the movie anymore. She hugged his arm and said, "Honey, can you take me to your workplace? Why do you suddenly want to go?" Chapter 2101. Shenmanting looked at him expectantly, and her mind was full of such images. Shenluo and was wearing a white coat and a mask, shuttling back and forth in the laboratory with all kinds of equipment. She was a little excited when she thought about it. She held Shenluo An's arm and said, "Honey, can you take me to see it?" Shenluo and looked down and saw Shenmanting's big bright eyes. They were full of expectation. He smiled and said, "Then put on your shoes." Shenmanting immediately cheered when she heard this. She jumped up and shouted, "Hooray!" Then, she immediately let go of Shenluo An's arm and ran to the shoe cabinet to find her new shoes. After putting them on happily, she ran back to the room and looked in the mirror. After finding that she was very cute and beautiful, she hurried out. "Let's go." Shenmanting was full of eagerness. Shenluo saw this, stood up, and picked up the car key. Along the way, Shenmanting's mind was full of what kind of scene she would see later. Looking at the rapidly passing road in front of her, she asked curiously, "Honey, will there be colleagues in the laboratory?" "Yes." "Will there be many? 2 business partners and some buddies?" "Yes." Shenmanting's eyes lit up. "I knew it. The scientists' laboratories must be secret bases. Very few people can get in, right? So there are only 2 like-minded partners who can realize their dreams together. Isn't that right, hubby?" Shenmanting's eyes lit up. Shenluo and couldn't help but laugh when he heard Shenmanting's cinematic words. For a moment, he didn't know whether to nod or shake his head. Soon, all Shenmanting's questions were answered. When they arrived at the laboratory, the colleagues had gone to eat, and Lao Wu and another colleague were injecting drugs into the mice. Just as Shenmanting had imagined, he was wearing a mask and a white coat. The laboratory was very big. There were all kinds of instruments, microscopes, computers, and test tubes. They were arranged in an orderly manner. When Shenmanting saw it, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" Lao Wu glanced at Shenluo and was surprised. "Luoan, why did you bring?" "Wow, sister-in-law?" Seeing this, the people next to him suddenly raised their heads. "This is sister-in-law?" "Sister-in-law is not a vegetable." "You're awake," Shenluo said. "Didn't Lao Wu tell you?" "She didn't come a few days ago because she woke up." When Jinyang heard this, he looked at OL5 and shouted, "Didn't you tell me that he has mental problems again? Are you lying to me?" When Shenmanting heard this, she immediately grasped the key point. Again, was Shenluo insane? Shenmanting was a little curious and asked, "Is my husband mentally ill?" OL5 suddenly laughed out loud. Jinyang smiled and said, "You can say that." Shenluo An's face darkened. "Don't talk nonsense. You're the ones with mental problems." He looked at Shenmanting and said, "Don't listen to them." "Oh." Old Five grinned and said, "Isn't depression also a mental illness? It's the same to call it mental illness." Jinyang agreed. His eyes observed the reaction of the mice in the glass box. That makes sense. Chapter 2102. It's just that I can't release myself in certain aspects. I'm too stressed and nervous, and I've created a sense of mental oppression on myself. Old Five smiled with a you know what I mean expression in his eyes. It's not very serious. At its worst, I've swallowed a few sleeping pills. Shinluo and said, if you continue to talk nonsense, you could forget about this month's salary. Oh, Jin Yong was not afraid at all. I'm just explaining it to your wife. You and your wife haven't been together for so long, and you've been abstinent for 2 years. Think about it. How can a normal man endure it for so long? That's right, Lao Wu interrupted. We're explaining it to you. If your wife misunderstands something, it'll be a big deal. Uh-huh, Jin Yong echoed. Shin Manting couldn't help but interrupt when she saw the two of them echoing each other. Didn't you say that sleeping pills will kill you? Puffed. Jin Yong laughed. Ahem. Lao Wu coughed lightly. How should I put it? He just wants to sleep. He still has a son to raise, so he can't bear to die. Oh. Shin Manting suddenly felt sad when she heard that. She reached out and hugged Shinluo An's arm. Shinluo An's face was already dark. He looked at the two of them and said, Are you done? Don't. Sister-in-law is still here. Lao Wu nudged Jin Yong. Jin Yong immediately nodded. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jin Yong. I just joined the team 2 years ago. Have you had lunch? We haven't eaten yet. Come and help us. Lao Wu took off his gloves and mask, revealing his full beard. Shin Manting didn't expect such a face under his mask. She blinked. However, she vaguely felt that it was very familiar. Lao Wu noticed that Shin Manting was staring at him. He touched his beard and said, You've grown again. You're sexier than 2 years ago, aren't you? Sexier? Shin Manting wanted to laugh. When she was about to say something, Shinluo pulled her aside. Don't talk to them. They're not good people. Shinluo went to the disinfection cabinet and took out a mask and gloves. Sit here and don't touch anything. Many things are more dangerous. Oh. Shin Manting was very obedient and sat aside. Jin Yong and Shinluo exchanged some information and then swaggered away. Shin Manting sat at the small bar counter and rested her face on her hands. She watched Shinluo work hard, and her eyes were filled with fascination. Ever since she woke up, he had been the one taking care of her. He was gentle, considerate, and understanding. Yet, she accepted all of his kindness as a matter of course. She didn't expect that he also had depression. Shin Manting didn't like the word depression very much. She didn't know where she came from, but she felt that people with this disease would die easily. Looking at him, she felt her heart ache. Shinluo wore gloves and held the white mouse in his hand. No one knew what he was doing, but Shun, she thought. She couldn't help but smile sweetly. Suddenly, she wanted to call out to him. As soon as this thought came to her, she moved faster than she realized. Hubby. Of. Chapter 2103. After shouting these words, Shin Manting automatically covered her entire face. His eyes darted left and right like a thief. Shinluo couldn't help laughing when he saw her cute little face. Then, he looked around just like her and put his finger to his lips. Shin Manting immediately understood. She covered her mouth and blinked her eyes. Shinluo whispered, Most of the people here are single. If you do this, they will take revenge on me. Shin Manting was shocked. She immediately covered her mouth and didn't dare to say a word. How could the people here be so cruel? How could they take revenge? Her big eyes were full of anger. Shinluo saw it and chuckled. But soon, he lowered his head and continued to work. Shinluo didn't let Shin Manting wait for long. After Lao Wu and Jin Yong came back from dinner, he immediately returned them. In the face of their protests, he arrogantly swaggered and said, My wife is here. I have to accompany her. I will come back tomorrow. After that, he swaggered away with his wife under the envious eyes of all the people in the laboratory. Shin Manting felt that people behind her were looking at her. She timidly held Shinluo An's arm. But in her heart, there was a kind of excitement of doing bad things and bullying people. She laughed all the way. When she walked out of the door, she threw herself into Shunluo An's arms and shouted, "Honey!" "Huh?" Shunluo and gently stroked her cheek with his palm and looked at her tenderly. "What's wrong?" Shinmanting grabbed the clothes around his waist with both hands, stood on tiptoe, and kissed his lips. She kissed him jerkily. Her movements were clumsy, but they easily stirred up his heart. Shunluo and immediately wrapped his arms around her waist, clasped her head with one hand, and gave her a deep and long kiss. Shinmanting's breathing was short, and her whole body was tense. But at the same time, she felt an unprecedented excitement. Oh. There was a teasing voice. Shunluo and immediately let go of Shinmanting and looked back. 3 or 5 people came out from inside. They looked at them with mischievous eyes and said, "Hello, boss, madam. We're just passing by. You can continue." Continue? Shinmanting's face was already red with embarrassment. She grabbed his clothes and buried her face in his arms. He waited until the footsteps of his fellows were far away before he dared to raise his head. She looked at Shunluo and then asked, "Are we going home now?" "Do you want to go home?" asked Shunluo, and Shinmanting wanted to go home to watch a movie and see her son. But when she saw the deep passion in his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to say it. His face burned even hotter as he said, "Then don't go home for now. What are we going to do then?" Shunluo and looked at her. "How about we get a room?" Get a room? All of a sudden, Shinmanting felt her body heat up. The result of last night's indulgence was that her lower body was still a little sore. Upon hearing this, she immediately pushed him away and rebuked, "I'm going to ignore you." Shinmanting strode forward with heavy footsteps. Shunluo and couldn't help but laugh. He pulled her back and said, "I'm just kidding. Let's go watch a movie." "Watch a movie? Shall we go to the cinema?" "Yes." "Great." Shinmanting was a little excited. "I've never been to a movie theater before. Let's go, I'll take you there." Chapter 2104. Shunluo and looked at her with a smile and nodded. Okay. When Shinmanting arrived at the cinema, she chose a movie with a name that seemed to suit her taste. It was called Iron Fist of Shame. Shunluo and didn't object. He bought popcorn and Coke, and Shinmanting asked for ice cream. The movie started, and the audience burst into laughter. However, Shinmanting occasionally asked, "Honey, what does the little egg mean?" Shunluo and said, "Well, it means that the man is childish." "Oh, honey," she stewed herself in an iron pot, and the water didn't boil. "She's so careless." Shunluo and laughed and hugged her to continue watching the movie. They laughed the whole time, and Shinmanting was very excited when the movie was about to end. "It's back, ah! It's so handsome!" Shinmanting shouted excitedly. Shunluo and began to doubt his own aesthetics. Is this handsome? But when the leading actor and actress kissed, Shinmanting turned her head and leaned over. "Honey," Shunluo and turned his face and was attacked by her small mouth, which was stained with the taste of ice cream and popcorn. Shinmanting was elated. She hugged the popcorn and moved to the side, sticking her tongue out at him. Shunluo and couldn't help laughing and warned in a low voice, "I'll teach you a lesson when we get back." Shinmanting pretended not to hear, and her eyes returned to the big screen. The movie ended, and Shinmanting was very excited. "Honey, where are we going next?" "Where do you want to go?" "I want to go to the aquarium." Shinmanting's purpose was very clear. Shunluo and smiled and said, "Okay." The aquarium in the capital was very big. But the only thing that could make Shinmanting stop and watch were the corals swimming up and down like umbrellas. The colorful lights shone on the transparent bodies, which looked particularly gorgeous. Shinmanting's face was almost stuck to the glass, and she exclaimed, "It's so beautiful." "It's dirty." Shunluo put his hand in front of her face. "Do you want to raise a nest at home?" Shinmanting's eyes lit up, and she looked up at him. "Can I?" "Yes," Shunluo smiled. "As long as you like it." "Yes." Shinmanting was very excited. "I like it so much." "All right." Shunluo looked at her. "I'll get someone to do it." "Ah." Shinmanting immediately hugged him. Hubby, you're the best. As she spoke, she glanced left and right, then quickly tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. Shenluo, Anne's heart was tickled. He was about to grab her, but she acted like she was playing a prank and immediately let go of him. She jumped to one side and looked at him with a grin. Shenluo, Anne's smile widened, and he said, "Naughty, come here." "No." Shenmanting clasped her hands behind her back and leaped forward. Gay and innocent as a child. A real child. There was a smile on his face, but he felt a little depressed in his heart. Shenluo followed and shouted, "Slow down, don't fall." "I won't." For a date. Of course, it had to be a romantic candlelight dinner. Shenluo, and took her to the famous revolving restaurant. He sat at the window seat, overlooking the entire capital. Shenmanting looked down, and her face was full of amazement. She said, "Hubby, it's so beautiful." "Do you like it?" "Yes. If you like it, we'll come often." Shenluo, and looked at her with a smile. "Next time, bring our son." That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.